What if the knucklehead ninja who saved his entire world got a second chance at life? But in fairy tale, picture this: Naruto freaking Uzumaki, the guy who could spam 1,000 shadow clones, go full sage mode, and literally punch interdimensional gods into submission, wakes up as some random kid named Kazuki with 0 memories. But here's the kicker: his chakra system is still intact, which means he's basically walking around with cheat codes in a world that runs on completely different rules. Now throw him into fairy tale, where family isn't just a word and nobody lets you suffer alone. Imagine Naruto's broken techniques mixing with Dragon Slayer magic, or his tactical genius coordinating with Lucy's strategies. The same guy who died sealing away cosmic horrors now has to figure out why that ancient serpent god is stirring again, and why it's hunting him specifically. Smash that like if you're ready for some serious crossover chaos, and let's see what happens when the ultimate solo fighter learns what it really means to have nakama. Kazuki jolted awake, sweat dripping down his face as the remnants of orange fur and massive claws faded from his vision. The same dream again. Always the same damn dream. A gigantic fox with 9 tails, eyes like burning coals, and hatred so thick you could taste it. Sometimes there was a blonde kid standing in front of it, hands glowing with some kind of blue energy. Sometimes the fox was locked behind massive metal bars. Tonight, both the kid and the fox had been screaming. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the lingering headache. 3 months since he'd joined Fairy Tail, and the dreams were getting worse, not better. Makarov kept saying his memories would return eventually, but what if he didn't want them to? What if there was a good reason he'd forgotten everything from before waking up outside Magnolia? Yo, Kazuki! The door to his small apartment burst open without any warning. Because apparently nobody in this guild understood the concept of knocking, Natsu Dragneel stood in the doorway, his usual fire-eating grin plastered across his face. Ready for today's job. It's gonna be awesome. Morning to you too, Kazuki muttered, pulling on his boots. And awesome usually means you're going to burn something down. Only if we're lucky, Natsu's eyes lit up with excitement. Come on, Lucy and Happy are already at the train station. We've got a merchant to escort to Onibus, and Lucy thinks there might be bandits on the road. Kazuki grabbed his jacket from the chair. It was just a simple escort mission, the kind of easy job perfect for someone still figuring out how his magic worked. His wind magic, as everyone assumed it was. He'd never bothered correcting them, mostly because he wasn't entirely sure what it actually was himself. The wind responded to him, sure, but there was something else. Something that felt like it was spinning, always spinning, just beneath the surface of his consciousness. Like a whirlpool of energy that he could tap into but never fully control. Earth to Kazuki, Natsu waved a hand in front of his face. You're doing that weird thinking thing again. It's called using your brain, Natsu. You should try it sometime. My brain works just fine. It tells me when to punch things and when to eat. What else do you need? Kazuki couldn't help but smile. 3 months and Natsu's simple outlook on life still amazed him. Everything was either something to fight, something to eat, or something to protect. No complicated strategies, no second guessing, no lying awake at night wondering if your dreams were actually memories of someone else's life. Must be nice. The train ride to Onibus was exactly as miserable as Kazuki expected. Natsu spent the entire 2 hours either unconscious from motion sickness or complaining about how trains were evil magic designed to torture dragon slayers. Lucy kept apologizing to the other passengers while Happy made jokes about Natsu's green face. Kazuki found himself studying the countryside rolling past the windows, and that nagging feeling hit him again. Like he should recognize something about the landscape, but couldn't quite place what. The way the forests grew along the hillsides, maybe, or how the roads curved between the valleys. You're doing it again, Lucy said, sliding into the seat across from him. That far away look. Just thinking about the job, he lied. Merchant escort missions can go sideways fast if you're not careful. Since when do you worry about simple escort jobs? She tilted her head, studying him with those sharp brown eyes. Lucy was way too good at reading people. You've been acting strange lately. Well, stranger than usual. Thanks for the vote of confidence. I'm serious, Kazuki. Ever since that job in Shiritsum last week, you've been different. More, I don't know, tense. Like you're waiting for something bad to happen. She wasn't wrong. Ever since that fight with those weird mages who'd used some kind of energy that felt familiar in all the wrong ways, he'd been on edge. Their magic had reminded him of something, but trying to remember what felt like grasping at smoke. Maybe I'm just taking the job seriously, he said finally. Or maybe you're overthinking everything like you always do. Lucy grinned and flicked his forehead. Not everything has to be a big mystery, you know. Sometimes a simple escort job is just a simple escort job. If only that were true. The merchant, a portly man named Boral who sold expensive fabrics, met them at the omnibus station with a wagon full of silk rolls and a nervous disposition. "Are you certain just the four of you will be enough?" he asked, wringing his hands as he looked over Team Natsu. "I've heard there are bandits on the northern road and my goods are worth quite a lot of money." "Don't worry about it," Natsu cracked his knuckles, flames dancing around his fists. "Any bandits show up, I'll roast 'em. Please don't roast my escort," Boral whimpered. "He won't roast you," Lucy assured him, shooting Natsu a warning look. "We're professionals." "Aye, professional dragon slayers," Happy added helpfully. Kazuki ignored their banter and focused on the road ahead. 3 hours to Oak Town through forest and hills. Plenty of places for an ambush, especially at the narrow pass about halfway through the journey. If he were planning to rob a merchant wagon, that's where he'd do it. The thought stopped him cold. Why did he know that? He'd never planned to rob anyone in his life, so where had that tactical assessment come from? "Kazuki," Lucy was looking at him with concern again. "You okay?" "Fine, just thinking about the route." He forced a smile. "Let's get moving before it gets dark." The first hour passed peacefully. Boral relaxed enough to start chatting about his business, and Natsu managed to stay awake despite the wagon's gentle rocking motion. Happy perched on Lucy's shoulder, occasionally diving down to investigate interesting flowers along the roadside. Kazuki found himself automatically cataloging potential threats as they traveled. High ground to the east where archers could hide. Dense undergrowth perfect for ambush points. A fallen log across a stream that looked too conveniently placed. Normal people didn't think like this, did they? Most mages would just blast their way through problems when they came up. But his mind kept working like some kind of tactical computer, analyzing terrain and sight lines and escape routes. "Bandits ahead," he said quietly as they approached the narrow pass. "What?" Natsu perked up immediately. "Where?" "I don't see anyone." "They're there." Kazuki pointed to a cluster of boulders on the hillside, 3 on the high ground with crossbows, 2 more hidden in those bushes to our left. "Probably one more behind us by now, cutting off retreat." Lucy squinted at the rocks. "I don't see anything. Trust me." The certainty in his own voice surprised him. How did he know? He couldn't see the bandits directly, but everything about the setup screamed ambush. The way a few birds had gone quiet, the positioning of natural cover, even the way shadows fell across the road. "Well, if Kazuki says there are bandits," Lucy said, reaching for her keys. "He's got good instincts." A crossbow bolt buried itself in the wagon seat right between Lucy and Boral. "Told you so," Kazuki muttered, rolling off the wagon as more bolts flew past his head. "Nobody move," a gruff voice called from the hillside. "Just throw down your weapons and hand over the cargo and nobody gets hurt." "Like hell," Natsu roared, flames erupting around his entire body. "Fire dragons, wait," Kazuki grabbed Natsu's arm before he could launch into his attack. "You'll hit Boral in the wagon, so that's what we're being paid to protect." Oh. Right, this was why Kazuki usually ended up making the plans. Natsu's solution to every problem was punch it with fire, which worked great until there were civilians or valuable cargo in the blast radius. "Lucy, can you get Boral to cover behind those rocks?" Kazuki pointed to a defensible position about 20 feet away. "Natsu, I need you to take out the archers, but try not to burn down the entire forest." "What about you?" Lucy asked. Good question, what was he going to do? His wind magic was decent for support, but he'd never been much of a fighter. Still, something in his chest was stirring, that spinning energy he could never quite grasp. "I'll handle the ground team," he said, surprised by his own confidence. The bandits came charging down the hillside, brandishing swords and shouting threats. 6 of them total, just like he'd predicted. Kazuki met them halfway, wind swirling around his feet as he moved. But something felt different this time. Instead of just calling up a breeze, the air around him began to rotate, spinning faster and faster until it formed visible spirals of compressed wind. One bandit swung a sword at his head. Without thinking, Kazuki ducked under the blade and struck back with his palm, a spinning ball of wind forming at the point of impact. The bandit flew backward like he'd been hit by a cannonball. What the hell was that? 2 more bandits flanked him from either side. Kazuki's body moved before his mind caught up, sliding low and spinning in a circle with his leg extended. The wind followed his motion, creating a horizontal cyclone that knocked both attackers off their feet. "Whoa," Happy called from somewhere above. "Kazuki's magic looks different." It felt different too. Less like manipulating wind and more like he was spinning the very air itself. creating spirals and whirlwinds that responded to his movements like they were extensions of his body. The last three bandits hesitated, clearly not expecting this level of resistance from a simple escort team. That hesitation cost them as Natsu came crashing down from the hillside, having finished with the archers. Fire Dragon's iron fist. The fight was over in seconds after that. Not bad for a wind mage, Natsu said as they tied up the unconscious bandits. But you fight weird. Weird how? I dunno. Like you're always thinking 3 moves ahead or something. And that spinning thing you did with the wind, I've never seen wind magic work like that. Kazuki frowned, neither had he, come to think of it. Wind magic was supposed to be about gusts and pressure, not spinning energy spirals. But when he'd been fighting, it had felt as natural as breathing. Maybe it's just his personal style, Lucy suggested. Everyone's magic is a little different, right? I suppose, Natsu shrugged, apparently losing interest in the topic. As long as it works, the rest of the journey to Oak Town passed without incident. Boral paid them with effusive thanks and a generous tip, and they caught the evening train back to Magnolia. Natsu fell asleep before they'd even left the station, finally succumbing to his motion sickness. Kazuki stared out the window as the countryside rolled past in the fading daylight. The spinning energy was still there, just beneath the surface, waiting to be called upon. But what was it? And why did using it feel so familiar? You're thinking again, Lucy observed. Sorry, just trying to figure out what happened back there with my magic. Maybe you're getting stronger. Makarov always says that magic grows through experience and emotion. Maybe. Or maybe whatever memories he'd lost were starting to surface, bringing new abilities with them. The thought should have been exciting, but instead it filled him with unease. What if he'd forgotten things for a good reason? The Fairy Tale Guildhall was still lively when they returned, despite the late hour. Kana was arm-wrestling Elfman at the bar, while Levy argued with Jet and Droy about something book-related. Gray sat at a table with Juvia, somehow managing to look both annoyed and resigned as she gushed about their destined love. Home. After 3 months, it finally felt like home. Kazuki settled at an empty table with a mug of ale and tried to process the day's events. The tactical thinking during the ambush, the new way his magic had responded, that persistent feeling that he should remember something important. Rough day, Master Makarov appeared beside his table, apparently having jumped down from the 2nd floor. The tiny guild master had a way of showing up whenever Kazuki was having an existential crisis. Just the usual job complications, Kazuki said, nothing we couldn't handle. Makarov studied him with those sharp eyes that seemed to see too much. Your magic felt different today, stronger, more focused. You could sense that from here. I can sense all my children's magic, Kazuki. It's part of being a guild master. Makarov took a sip from his own oversized mug. Your power has been growing steadily since you joined us, but today there was something new, something older. Older. What did that mean? Master, when you found me outside town, did I have anything with me? Any clues about where I came from? You know I've told you everything I can, Makarov said gently. You were unconscious, wearing clothes that weren't from any region I recognized, and your magical signature was unlike anything I'd encountered before. But Kazuki, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Sometimes the past finds us when we're ready for it, not when we think we want it. Before Kazuki could ask what that meant, a commotion erupted near the guild doors. 2 strangers had entered, a man and woman in dark cloaks that obscured their faces. Excuse me, the woman called out, her voice carrying an edge of urgency. We're looking for information about someone. A young man with unusual magical abilities, wind magic, but different, spinning patterns perhaps. The entire guild hall went quiet. Every eye turned toward Kazuki's table. The man stepped forward, pushing back his hood to reveal sharp features and cold gray eyes. We've heard tales of one who dreams of spirals and speaks to the wind in ancient tongues. Have any of you encountered such a person? Kazuki's blood ran cold. Dreams of spirals. How could they know about his dreams? Can't say that we have, Makarov answered evenly, though Kazuki noticed the master's hand moving subtly toward his staff. And you are travelers, the woman replied, not bothering to lower her own hood. Researchers, you might say. We're very interested in meeting this individual. Our organization believes he may be. Important? Important how? Lucy had appeared at Kazuki's shoulder, and he could hear the tension in her voice. That would be between us and him, the man said, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Kazuki for just a moment too long. But I assure you we mean no harm. We simply wish to speak with him about his heritage. Heritage. Another word that should have meant something but didn't. Well, you're welcome to look around Magnolia, Makarov said diplomatically. Though I'm afraid you won't find what you're seeking here. The strangers exchanged a glance. Perhaps not today, the woman agreed, but we'll be staying in town for a while. Just in case. They left as suddenly as they'd arrived, leaving the guild hall buzzing with whispered conversations. Friends of yours? Lucy asked quietly. Never seen them before in my life, Kazuki replied, which was true as far as he knew. But something about them had felt wrong, dangerous, like the sensation he'd gotten from those bandits' magic but stronger. They knew about your dreams, Natsu pointed out bluntly. The spiral thing. How would strangers know about that? Kazuki didn't have an answer. He'd never told anyone about the dreams except Makarov, and he trusted the guild master completely. So how did two random travelers know about something so personal, unless they weren't random at all? I think, he said slowly, my past just found me. And judging by the looks on those strangers' faces, he wasn't sure he was ready for it. 2 days had passed since the strangers visited Fairy Tale, and Kazuki couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a pair of eyes, every whispered conversation felt like it was about him. He'd caught glimpses of dark cloaks in the market, always just at the edge of his vision, always disappearing when he looked directly. You're being paranoid, Lucy said for the third time that morning as they walked toward the guild hall. Maybe they really were just researchers. Researchers don't ask about people's dreams, Lucy, and they definitely don't have that kind of magical pressure. Kazuki glanced over his shoulder again. Nothing. I could feel it when they walked in. Their magic was wrong somehow. Wrong how? I don't know, dark but not like dark magic, more like, he struggled to find the right words. Like they were using something that wasn't really theirs. Natsu, who'd been unusually quiet during their walk, suddenly perked up. Hey, speaking of magic feeling wrong, we got a job request this morning that might interest you. What kind of job? Some village called Lupinus is having trouble with a group of mages. They're demanding tribute and threatening people, typical bandit stuff. But according to the request, their magic feels unnatural and foreign. Natsu grinned, flames flickering around his scarf. Sounds like a perfect chance to blow off some steam. Kazuki stopped walking. Foreign magic, that's what caught my attention too, Lucy said. After what happened with those strangers, I figured you might want to check it out. See if there's a connection. Maybe it was paranoia, but Kazuki had learned to trust his instincts over the past few months, and his instincts were screaming that this wasn't a coincidence. All right, he said. Let's take the job. Lupinus was a small farming village about a day's journey south of Magnolia, nestled in a valley between rolling hills covered in wheat fields. Under normal circumstances, it would have been peaceful. Today, half the buildings showed signs of magical damage, and the villagers looked terrified. They came 3 days ago, explained the village elder, a weathered man named Henrik. 6 mages in dark robes demanding we pay them for protection. When we refused, they started destroying crops and buildings. What did their magic look like? Kazuki asked. Strange, like shadows but solid. And there was this energy around them, Henrik shuddered. Felt wrong, like it was eating at the air itself. Kazuki exchanged glances with Lucy and Natsu, shadows that felt wrong and ate at the air. That sounded uncomfortably familiar. Where are they now? Camped in the old mill on the hill. They said they'd be back tomorrow for our answer. Henrik's hands shook as he pointed toward a stone building visible in the distance. Please, we can't pay what they're asking. It would leave us with nothing for winter. Don't worry, Natsu said, cracking his knuckles. We'll take care of them. But as they approached the mill, Kazuki felt that same wrongness he'd sensed from the strangers at the guild. It was stronger here, more concentrated, like the very air was being twisted into unnatural shapes. There, Lucy whispered, pointing to figures moving around the mill. 6 of them, just like Henrik said. The mages were setting up some kind of ritual circle, dark energy crackling between their hands as they carved symbols into the ground. At the center of the circle was a stone altar covered in what looked like ancient text. What are they doing? Natsu asked. Nothing good, Kazuki replied, studying the ritual setup. The symbols looked familiar, but he couldn't place where he'd seen them before. We need to stop them before they finish whatever that is. Finally, some action. Natsu grinned and charged forward, flames erupting around his fists. Fire dragons roar. The stream of fire caught 2 of the mages off guard, sending them flying. But the other 4 reacted quickly, raising barriers of solid shadow that absorbed Natsu's flames. Persistent little dragons, one of them sneered, his voice carrying an odd accent. No matter, we only need a few more minutes. That's when Kazuki felt it, the same energy signature he'd sensed from the strangers at Fairy Tale. These weren't random bandits, they were connected to whoever was looking for him. "Lucy, can you disrupt their ritual?" he called out while dodging a blast of shadow magic. "Whatever they're doing, we can't let them finish." On it. "Open gate of the Golden Bull Taurus." The massive spirit appeared with his usual enthusiasm, immediately charging toward the ritual circle with his axe raised. But one of the mages gestured sharply, and tendrils of shadow wrapped around Taurus like chains. "Pathetic celestial magic," the mage laughed. "Our power comes from a much older source." Older source. There was that word again. Kazuki found himself facing two of the shadow mages at once, their magic lashing out like solid whips. He tried to counter with his wind magic, but something strange was happening. The spinning energy inside him was responding to their attacks, growing stronger and more agitated. One of the mages raised his hands, dark energy coiling around them. Shadow binding technique. The attack came faster than Kazuki could dodge. Tendrils of solid darkness wrapped around his arms and legs, pinning him in place. But instead of panic, he felt recognition, like he'd seen this technique before. "Now hold still," the mage said, stepping closer. "Our master will be very interested in examining you." Master. So they were working for someone. The shadow binding tightened, and pain shot through Kazuki's body. But with the pain came something else, a flash of memory so vivid it felt like he was actually there. A classroom full of children wearing strange headbands. A man with a scar across his nose standing at the front, demonstrating hand movements. Remember, the key to any binding technique is chakra control. Watch carefully. Chakra, what was chakra? Without thinking, Kazuki's hands moved into positions he didn't remember learning. His fingers interlocked in a specific pattern, and energy flowed through his body in a way that felt both alien and completely natural. Shadow clone technique. The words came out of his mouth before his brain caught up with what he was saying. And suddenly there were three of him standing in the mill, all solid, all real. The shadow mage stumbled backward in shock. "Impossible. How do you know the—" He never finished the sentence. One of Kazuki's duplicates hit him with a spinning ball of wind, while another freed the original from the shadow bindings. The third duplicate was already moving toward the ritual circle, moving in a low crouch with a speed and precision that definitely wasn't normal wind magic technique. "What the hell?" Natsu paused mid-punch to stare at the three Kazukis. "Since when can you make copies of yourself?" Good question. Since never, as far as Kazuki knew, but it felt right, like he'd been doing it his whole life. The duplicates moved with his thoughts, fought with his instincts, and somehow he could see through all their eyes at once. "Focus on the fight," one of his duplicates called out, engaging another shadow mage. "Figure out the existential crisis later." The battle became a blur of shadow and flame and spinning wind. Lucy managed to summon Virgo to help disrupt the ritual, while Natsu tackled two mages at once with his usual head-on approach. But it was Kazuki's duplicates that turned the tide, attacking from multiple angles with a coordination that shouldn't have been possible. One of the shadow mages, their leader, judging by the extra symbols on his robe, broke away from the fight and ran toward the ritual circle. "If we can't capture him, we'll complete the summoning. Master Yamada will be pleased." Yamada. The name hit Kazuki like a physical blow, bringing with it another flash of memory. A massive serpent with glowing red eyes coiled around what looked like a burning village. A voice full of hatred. "I will devour this world piece by piece until nothing remains but darkness." "Stop him," Kazuki shouted, but the mage was already at the altar, placing his hands on the ancient text. Dark energy erupted from the circle, and the air itself seemed to tear. Through the gap, Kazuki could see something moving, something huge and scaly and absolutely terrifying. "The seal weakens," the mage laughed. "Soon, Lord Yamada will." A spinning ball of pure wind energy hit him in the chest, sending him flying away from the altar. The ritual circle flickered and went dark, the tear in the air snapping shut. Kazuki stared at his hand, where wisps of energy were still dissipating. He'd created that attack instinctively, without thinking, and it had been far more powerful than anything he'd managed before. "Rasengan," he whispered, though he had no idea why. The remaining shadow mages, seeing their leader defeated and their ritual failed, retreated into the forest. Within minutes, the mill was quiet except for the sound of everyone catching their breath. "Okay," Lucy said, dismissing Taurus and Virgo. "What just happened? And don't tell me that was normal wind magic, because I've seen wind magic, and it doesn't make copies of people." Kazuki looked around at his duplicates, who were standing at attention like soldiers waiting for orders. With a thought, he dismissed them, and they dissolved into wisps of energy. "I have no idea," he said honestly. "It just felt right, like I'd done it before." Those techniques, Natsu said, his expression unusually serious. They weren't magic, they felt different, older like that guy said. Lucy was studying Kazuki with sharp eyes. When you used that first technique, the one that made the copies, you said something, shadow clone technique. That's not a magic spell name. She was right. Magic spells in Fior had names like Fire Dragon's Roar or Celestial Spirit Magic. But shadow clone technique sounded more like a fighting style, he said slowly. Or a martial art. From where, I've never heard of martial arts that could create solid duplicates of a person. Neither had Kazuki, but somehow he knew how to do it. Just like he'd known how to create that spinning energy attack and how to move in combat with instincts that felt decades old. We should get back to the guild, he said finally. Levi might be able to research this. And I think Master Makarov needs to know what happened here. As they started the journey back to Magnolia, Kazuki couldn't stop thinking about the memories that had surfaced during the fight. A classroom, a teacher with a scarred face, and techniques that felt more familiar than his own name. Who had he been before waking up outside Magnolia? And why were people with shadow magic looking for him? Absolutely fascinating. Levi's eyes lit up as she spread books and scrolls across the table. It was late evening, and the guild hall was mostly empty except for a few die-hard drinkers at the bar. Find anything? Lucy asked, leaning over Levi's shoulder to look at the research materials. Maybe. These symbols you described from the ritual, I found similar ones in a book about ancient sealing magic. But Kazuki, the techniques you used. She pulled out a particularly old tome. There are legends about warriors who could create perfect duplicates of themselves using pure life energy. They called it chakra. Chakra, Kazuki repeated. The word felt right on his tongue, like coming home after a long journey. What else do the legends say? Not much that's useful. Most of the records were lost centuries ago. But according to this, she pointed to a faded illustration, chakra users could perform incredible feats by manipulating their own life force. Creating duplicates, walking on walls, even, she paused, checking the translation. Even creating spinning spheres of pure energy, like the attack he'd used to stop the ritual. There's something else, Levi continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. The book mentions a great war, fought between chakra users and something called the Shadow Devourers. It says the war ended when the chakra users sealed away their greatest enemy, a serpent god named Yamada no Orochi. The name hit Kazuki like ice water in his veins. He'd heard it during the fight and again in that strange memory vision. What happened to the chakra users? They disappeared. Some say they were wiped out in the final battle. Others believe they scattered to other dimensions, hiding until the seal weakened and they were needed again. Other dimensions. Kazuki thought about waking up outside Magnolia with no memories and magic that didn't work like anyone else's. Levi, he said carefully, is it possible for someone to be reborn in a different world? Theoretically, there are records of dimensional travel and some forms of reincarnation magic, but why would? She stopped, studying his face. Kazuki, you don't think you're, I don't know what I think anymore. Well, whatever you are, Urza's voice cut through their conversation as she approached the table, you're going to explain those combat techniques to me. Now, Kazuki winced. He'd been hoping to avoid Urza's attention, but apparently his luck had run out. The scarlet-haired mage settled into a chair across from him with the expression of someone conducting an interrogation. Those weren't magic techniques, she said bluntly. I've studied combat magic from every region of Ishkur, and what you did today doesn't match any known discipline. So where did you learn them? I don't remember learning them, they just came to me during the fight. Muscle memory doesn't work that way. Techniques that advanced require years of training. Urza's eyes narrowed. Either you're lying about your memory loss or something else is going on. I'm not lying. The words came out sharper than Kazuki intended. You think I want to be dealing with any of this? You think I enjoy having strangers show up looking for me, or fighting people with magic that feels like it's trying to eat my soul? Then tell me what you do remember, Urza said, her voice gentling slightly. Even fragments might help. Kazuki closed his eyes, trying to sort through the flashes of memory that had surfaced during the battle. A classroom, children wearing metal headbands with symbols on them. A teacher with a scar across his nose showing us hand movements. He paused. And orange, lots of orange. Orange what? I don't know, clothing maybe, it felt important. Urza and Levi exchanged glances. Anything else? Pain, Kazuki said quietly, and the feeling that I'd lost something important, someone important. He looked up at them. What if I died in my original world? What if that's why I can't remember, because those memories belong to someone who doesn't exist anymore? That's impossible, Lucy said firmly. You're not dead, you're right here. But what if the person I used to be is dead and I'm just an echo, a copy created by some kind of reincarnation magic? Stop it. Urza's voice was sharp. I don't care what you were or who you used to be. What matters is who you are now. You're Kazuki, a member of Fairy Tail, and you're our nakama. Nothing else matters. The certainty in her voice was comforting, but Kazuki couldn't shake the feeling that his past was catching up with him whether he wanted it to or not. The Shadow Mages had been looking for him specifically, and they'd mentioned a master who would be interested in examining him. There's one more thing, he said, pulling up his sleeve. This appeared after the fight. On his palm, just below his thumb, was a small spiral-shaped mark. It looked like a tattoo, but he was certain it hadn't been there that morning. Levi gasped. That's the symbol from the ancient texts. The mark of the chakra users. Great, Kazuki muttered. So I'm definitely connected to all this somehow. Which means those people looking for you aren't going to give up, Urza pointed out. We need to be ready for. The guild doors burst open with a bang that echoed through the mostly empty hall. A figure in a dark cloak stumbled inside, bleeding from multiple wounds. Please, the stranger gasped, collapsing to his knees. I have to warn them. The spiral bearer is in danger. The seal, it's breaking. He fell forward, unconscious, and Kazuki saw that his back was covered in spiral-shaped burns that matched the mark on his own palm exactly. Whatever was hunting him, it was getting closer. The stranger's name was Kenji, and when he finally woke up 2 days later, he brought news that made Kazuki's blood run cold. The spiral cult has been hunting survivors for months, Kenji said weakly from the guild's infirmary bed. His back was still covered in bandages where those spiral burns had seared through his cloak. Anyone with even a trace of the old bloodline, most of us are already dead. Us? Makarov leaned forward in his chair, his usual jovial expression replaced by something much more serious. The descendants of the chakra users. There aren't many left, maybe 24 scattered across different dimensions. Kenji's eyes found Kazuki's face. But you're different, you're not just a descendant, you're him, aren't you? The one who made the original seal. Kazuki felt the room spinning around him. I don't know what you're talking about. The spiral mark on your palm says otherwise. Kenji struggled to sit up, wincing from the pain. I felt your power when I got close to Magnolia. It's exactly like the legends describe, ancient, vast, and barely contained. You're the spiral bearer, reborn just as the prophecies said you would be. Prophecies? Lucy asked from her spot near the window. When the seal begins to weaken, the bearer will return to finish what was started. Kenji recited the words like a prayer. He will carry the power of the spiral and the wisdom of the sage, but he will be lost between worlds, knowing neither who he was nor who he must become. The description was uncomfortably accurate. Kazuki rubbed his temple, trying to ward off the headache that always came when people talked about his supposed destiny. Even if that's true, I don't remember being anyone important. I can barely control the powers I have now. That's what makes you dangerous to the cult, Kenji said. If you regain your full memories and abilities before they can capture you, you'll be strong enough to reinforce the seal permanently. But if they get to you first, he shuddered, they'll break you open like an egg and let Yamata no Orochi consume your power from the inside. The mental image was not pleasant. How long do we have? Makarov asked quietly. Not long. The cult has ways of tracking him now that his power is awakening. Maybe days, maybe weeks. Kenji's voice was getting weaker. They're already in the city, I can feel them. Natsu, who'd been unusually quiet during the entire conversation, finally spoke up. So we fight them? Simple. It's not that simple. Kenji looked terrified at the suggestion. These aren't normal dark mages. They've been consuming the life force of chakra descendants for months, growing stronger with each kill. And their leader, he went pale, their leader has been touched by Yamada himself. Fighting him would be suicide. Kazuki stood up abruptly. Then I'll leave. What? Lucy jumped to her feet. Kazuki, no, if they're tracking me, then staying here puts everyone at risk. The decision felt right, even as it tore at his chest. I won't be responsible for Fairy Tail getting hurt because of something I don't even understand. Like hell you're leaving. Natsu was on his feet too, flames flickering around his fists. We're a team, are we? Kazuki turned on him, frustration and fear boiling over. Because from where I stand, I'm a walking disaster magnet who just learned he might be the reincarnation of some ancient warrior. That's not exactly team-friendly. So what? Natsu shot back. You think any of us are normal? Lucy talks to star spirits. I was raised by a dragon and gray strips in public without realizing it. Weird is kind of our thing. Despite everything, Kazuki almost smiled at that, but the moment of levity faded quickly. This is different, Natsu. People are dying because of me. People die because of evil mages doing evil things, Urza said firmly from the doorway. None of them had heard her enter the infirmary. The responsibility lies with the cult, not with you. Easy to say when you're not the one they're hunting. Urza's expression softened slightly. Actually, it's not easy to say at all. I know exactly what it feels like to carry the weight of other people's suffering. She moved closer, and Kazuki could see old pain in her eyes. But running away never solves anything. It just means you face the darkness alone instead of with people who care about you. The words hit harder than he'd expected. Kazuki had been alone for the 3 months before joining Fairy Tail, alone with strange dreams and fragmented memories and magic that didn't work like anyone else's. The loneliness had been crushing, but that didn't change the facts. I can't risk it, he said quietly. I'm sorry. He walked out of the infirmary before anyone could argue further. 3 hours later, Kazuki was on a train heading north toward Ashibana, trying to convince himself he'd made the right choice. The request was simple enough: investigate reports of monsters in the forests near Mount Hakob. A solo job, far enough from Magnolia that the cult hopefully wouldn't connect it to Fairy Tail. The train car was mostly empty, which suited his mood perfectly. Through the window, he watched the countryside roll past and tried not to think about the looks on his guildmates' faces when he'd left. Lucy had looked betrayed, Natsu had looked angry, Urza had looked disappointed, which was somehow worse than both of the others combined. But they'd understand eventually. When the cult came looking and found an empty bed instead of a target, when Fairy Tail remained safe while he dealt with his problems alone, then they'd see he'd made the right choice. The train pulled into Ashibana just as the sun was setting. Kazuki shouldered his pack and started the long walk toward Mount Hakob, following a forest path that was barely more than a deer trail. According to the job request, loggers had been reporting attacks by creatures that didn't match any known magical beasts. Probably just displaced monsters fleeing from some other conflict, but it was work that would keep him busy while he figured out his next move. The forest was quiet except for the usual sounds of nocturnal animals stirring to life. Kazuki set a steady pace, his enhanced senses alert for any sign of trouble. The job posting had mentioned that the attacks happened at night, so he wanted to reach the reported area before full darkness fell. He'd been walking for about 2 hours when he heard the howl. It echoed through the trees like something out of a nightmare too deep for a wolf, too wild for anything domesticated. And there was something underneath it that made Kazuki's newly awakened instincts scream warnings. The same wrongness he'd felt from the shadow mages. He broke into a run, following the sound toward its source. If these creatures were connected to the cult somehow, then he'd walked straight into exactly the kind of danger he'd been trying to avoid. The howl came again, closer this time, and Kazuki caught a glimpse of movement between the trees. Something large and fast, with eyes that glowed an unnatural red. He'd barely had time to form a spiral of defensive wind around himself when the creature attacked. It was like a wolf, if wolves were the size of horses, and had shadow leaking from their fur like smoke. Claws that looked sharp enough to cut stone raked through the air where Kazuki's head had been a second before. He rolled to the side and came up with wind spinning around his hands, but the creature was already moving again. Too fast. Much too fast for something that size. Another howl answered from the opposite direction, and Kazuki's heart sank as he realized there were more of them. At least 3, probably more, and they were coordinating their attacks with intelligence that normal beasts didn't possess. Shadow clone technique. 2 duplicates appeared beside him, but even with the extra numbers, they were outmatched. These weren't bandits or confused dark mages, they were predators designed specifically for hunting. One of the shadow wolves lunged at his clone from the left, while another attacked from the right. Kazuki tried to coordinate a defense, but splitting his attention 3 ways while maintaining the duplicates was harder than it looked. His original body took a glancing blow from massive claws, tearing through his jacket and drawing blood. The scent of his blood seemed to drive the creatures into a frenzy. More howls echoed through the forest, at least 6 distinct voices now, maybe more. This had been a trap. The job posting, the remote location, the convenient timing, it was all designed to get him alone and vulnerable. A 4th wolf emerged from the underbrush directly in front of him, and Kazuki realized with growing horror that he was surrounded. Make ice, ice geyser! A pillar of ice erupted from the ground, catching one of the shadow wolves in the chest and sending it flying into a tree. The other creatures snarled and turned toward this new threat, giving Kazuki a moment to catch his breath. Gray Fullbuster stepped out from behind a cluster of pine trees, already forming another ice attack. Yo, idiot, fancy meeting you here. Gray, Kazuki stared at his guildmate in shock. What are you doing here? Saving your sorry ass, apparently. Gray launched a volley of ice spears at the nearest wolf. Did you really think we'd just let you walk off into danger alone? Before Kazuki could answer, another familiar voice called out from above. Sky Dragon's roar! A tornado of wind slammed into two of the shadow wolves, scattering them like leaves. Wendy Marvel dropped down from the tree canopy, her small form glowing with Dragon Slayer magic. Wendy too, Kazuki couldn't believe what he was seeing. How did you even find me? Tracking spell, Wendy said, pointing to a small paper charm attached to his backpack. Lucy put it there before you left. She was worried about you. Of course she had. Kazuki didn't know whether to feel grateful or irritated that his guildmates had ignored his decision to handle things alone. The shadow wolves regrouped quickly, their red eyes fixed on the three mages with predatory hunger. Now that there were more targets, they spread out in a wider circle, cutting off all routes of escape. These things aren't normal magical beasts, Gray observed, ice forming around his hands. They feel wrong. They're connected to the cult, Kazuki said, probably created specifically to hunt people like me. Great. Magical assassin wolves. Gray's expression was grim. Any bright ideas for dealing with them? Before Kazuki could answer, the largest of the creatures threw back its head and let out a howl that seemed to shake the very air. Dark energy rippled outward from its position, and Kazuki felt his magic fluctuating in response. They're trying to disrupt our magic, Wendy called out, her own power flickering as the dark energy washed over her. That's when Kazuki realized what the creatures were really doing. They weren't just trying to kill him, they were trying to weaken him enough for capture. The cult wanted him alive. Stay close, he told Gray and Wendy. I think I know what they want. The shadow wolves attacked in perfect coordination, moving like a pack that had hunted together for years. Gray met the first one head-on, coating his fists in ice and trading blows with claws and fangs. Wendy stayed mobile, using her wind magic to keep the creatures off balance and unable to surround them completely. But it was Kazuki who drew their primary attention. Even while fighting Gray and Wendy, the wolves kept trying to maneuver him away from his allies. They wanted to separate him, isolate him, make him easier to subdue. Not happening, he muttered, forming the hand seals for his strongest technique. Shadow clone technique, multi-clone division. Instead of 2 duplicates, he created 8. The forest suddenly filled with identical copies of Kazuki, each one moving with perfect coordination. The shadow wolves hesitated, clearly not expecting this level of replication. Their pack tactics were designed for hunting single targets, not dealing with a small army of opponents. Kazuki pressed the advantage, directing his clones in a complex pincer movement that he somehow knew without ever having learned it. 4 clones engaged the wolves directly while the other 4 moved to cut off escape routes. Meanwhile, his original body stayed back with Gray and Wendy, coordinating the assault. Where did you learn to fight like this? Gray asked, launching ice attacks with surgical precision to support the clone offensive. I have no idea, Kazuki replied honestly. But it feels right. The battle turned decisively in their favor within minutes. The shadow wolves, confused and outmaneuvered, began retreating deeper into the forest. Kazuki's clones pursued them just far enough to make sure they were really leaving, then returned to the group. Well, Gray said as Kazuki dismissed his duplicates, that was educational. Are you hurt? Wendy asked, her hands already glowing with healing magic. Nothing serious, Kazuki replied, though he was more shaken than he wanted to admit. The wolves' coordinated attack, the way they'd tried to separate him from his allies, it felt like something he'd experienced before. But you too shouldn't have come. It's dangerous being around me. Yeah, we noticed, Gray said dryly. But here's the thing, idiot, it's dangerous being around any of us. That's what happens when you fight dark mages for a living. This is different. No, it's not. Gray's voice was unusually serious. You think you're the first person in Fairy Tail to have enemies. You think Natsu doesn't have people hunting him because of his Dragon Slayer magic. You think Urza doesn't deal with threats from her past. Kazuki wanted to argue, but Gray wasn't finished. We're a guild, Kazuki. That means we face danger together, not alone. And if you think we're going to abandon you just because some ancient cult wants to use you for a ritual, then you don't understand what nakama means. The word hit Kazuki like a physical blow. Nakama, Fairy Tail used it constantly, but hearing it from Gray, who usually avoided emotional speeches, made it feel more real somehow. Kazuki struggled to find the right words. I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me. Too late, Wendy said quietly. We're already hurt, worried sick about you, actually. Do you know how upset Lucy was when you left? The guilt was almost overwhelming. Kazuki had been so focused on protecting his guildmates that he'd forgotten they might actually want to be protected alongside him instead of from him. I'm sorry, he said finally. I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing is trusting your friends, Gray said. Come on, let's go home before Lucy sends out a full search party. The train ride back to Magnolia was much more pleasant than the trip out had been. Wendy fell asleep against the window within the first hour, exhausted from the battle and the long day of travel. Gray dozed fitfully across from them, occasionally muttering complaints about the train's heating system. Kazuki stared out at the dark countryside and tried to process everything that had happened. The Shadow Wolves' coordinated attack. The way his clones had moved with tactical precision, he definitely didn't remember learning. Gray and Wendy risking themselves to help him even after he tried to push them away. You're thinking too hard again, Gray said without opening his eyes. How can you tell? You get this crease between your eyebrows when you're overthinking. Gray cracked one eye open. What's eating at you now? When we were fighting those wolves, I knew exactly how to coordinate the clones. Not just instinctively, I had a complete tactical plan in my head within seconds. Formation patterns, timing, even backup strategies in case the first approach failed. So where did that knowledge come from? I've never commanded troops or studied military strategy. But out there, it felt like I'd been leading battles my entire life. Gray was quiet for a moment. Maybe you have been, in whatever life you had before this one. That's what scares me. Kazuki turned to look at his guildmate. What if I wasn't a good person in my previous life? What if I have the memories of someone who hurt people? Then you'll choose to be better now, Gray said simply. The past doesn't define who you are, Kazuki. I should know. There was something in Gray's tone that suggested personal experience with that particular truth. Kazuki wanted to ask about it, but Gray had already closed his eyes again, signaling the end of the conversation. The train pulled into Magnolia Station just after midnight. The platform was empty except for a single figure waiting under one of the gas lamps. Lucy. She was pacing back and forth, clearly agitated. When she spotted them disembarking from the train, her face went through a rapid succession of emotions: relief, anger, worry, and something that might have been affection. You idiots, she shouted, running toward them. Do you have any idea how worried we've been? Sorry, Kazuki said, meaning it. I thought, Lucy cut him off by throwing her arms around him in a fierce hug. Don't you ever do that again, she said into his shoulder. Promise me? The warmth of the embrace, the genuine fear in her voice, the way she was shaking slightly, it all hit Kazuki like a revelation. These people weren't just his guildmates, they were his family. And families didn't abandon each other when things got dangerous. I promise, he said quietly. Lucy pulled back to look at him and he could see tears in her eyes. Good. Because if you try to run off again, I'm going to summon Aquarius and let her deal with you. That's a terrifying threat. It's supposed to be. Lucy wiped her eyes and managed a wobbly smile. Come on, Master wants to see you. He's been in his office all night, researching something. They found Makarov exactly where Lucy had said he'd be, surrounded by ancient books and scrolls, with Levy fast asleep at a nearby table covered in translation notes. The old guild master looked up as they entered, and Kazuki was surprised by the relief in his eyes. Kazuki, Makarov said simply, I'm glad you're safe. I'm sorry I left without permission, Master. It was, Makarov held up a hand. You don't need to apologize to me, but perhaps you'd like to explain to Lucy why her tracking spell led Gray and Wendy into battle with magical creatures that shouldn't exist. Kazuki glanced at Lucy, who looked sheepish. You put a tracking spell on me? I was worried, she protested. And it's a good thing I did, considering you walked straight into a trap. It was a trap, Kazuki agreed. Those wolves were created specifically to hunt chakra users. They were trying to weaken me for capture, not kill me. Makarov's expression grew grave, which means the cult is getting bolder and closer. He gestured to the books around him. I've been researching everything I can find about the Spiral Sage legends. The results are concerning. How concerning? According to the oldest texts, Yamata no Orochi wasn't just sealed away, it was bound to the dimensional barrier itself. If the seal breaks completely, Makarov paused, choosing his words carefully, it won't just release the serpent, it will tear holes between worlds, allowing all manner of dark entities to pour through. The implications were staggering. Kazuki sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what they were dealing with. So if the cult succeeds in breaking me, they don't just get a powerful weapon, they get a dimensional catastrophe. Precisely. Which is why running away was never an option. Makarov's voice was kind but firm. This isn't just about you anymore, Kazuki. The safety of multiple worlds may depend on keeping you whole and helping you regain your full power. No pressure or anything, Gray muttered. Despite the gravity of the situation, Kazuki almost smiled. Trust Gray to find the dark humor in impending dimensional catastrophe. There is one piece of good news, Levy said sleepily from her table of research materials. I found references to a sanctuary, a place where the original chakra users hid their most important knowledge. Where? That's the bad news. It's hidden somewhere in the Alvarez Empire, protected by magical barriers that only respond to the spiral mark. She pointed to Kazuki's palm. You'd have to go there personally to access it. The Alvarez Empire, the most militaristic nation in Ishkur, ruled by Emperor Spriggan and home to some of the most powerful mages on the continent. Not exactly an easy field trip. We'll worry about that later, Makarov said. For now, our priority is strengthening the guild's defenses and helping Kazuki master his abilities before the cult makes their next move. How long do you think we have? Lucy asked. Before Makarov could answer, a tremendous crash echoed from somewhere in the city, then another, and another. Kazuki felt the spiral mark on his palm grow warm, then hot, then painful. Through the office window, he could see strange lights flickering in the sky above Magnolia. Not long enough, Makarov said grimly. The cult had found them. The guild hall erupted into chaos as the windows exploded inward, showering everyone with glass and debris. Dark figures poured through the openings like living shadows, their faces hidden beneath deep hoods and their hands crackling with that same wrong energy Kazuki had felt from the shadow wolves. Everyone stay calm, Makarov shouted, his voice magically amplified to carry over the noise. Protect the younger members. But there was nothing calm about what happened next. The cultists moved with inhuman speed and coordination, spreading throughout the hall like they'd been planning this attack for weeks. Which Kazuki realized with growing dread they probably had been. There, one of them pointed directly at the office where Kazuki stood frozen behind the window. The bearer, take him alive. Half a dozen cultists broke away from the main assault and headed straight for the stairs. Kazuki felt his spiral mark burning like fire against his palm, responding to their proximity in ways he didn't understand. Not in my guild. Urza's voice rang out from below as she requipped into her Heaven's Wheel armor, sending dozens of swords spinning toward the advancing cultists. But their shadow magic absorbed the blades like they were made of mist. Their magic isn't natural, Levy called out, ducking behind an overturned table. It's consuming other magical energy. That explained why traditional attacks weren't working. These weren't normal dark mages, they were something far more dangerous. Kazuki started toward the office door, but Makarov caught his arm. Wait, if you go down there, you'll be walking into exactly what they want. I can't just hide up here while they attack my guild. You're not hiding, Makarov's eyes were serious. You're choosing your moment. Let them come to us, force them to fight on our terms, not theirs. The office door exploded off its hinges before Kazuki could respond. 3 cultists stepped through the smoking doorway, their faces finally visible in the flickering light. They looked human mostly, but their skin had a grayish pallor and their eyes were solid black. Spiral Bearer, the lead cultist said in a voice that sounded like grinding stone. You will come with us willingly, or we will drag you from the corpses of your friends. Door number 3, Gray said, appearing behind the cultists with ice coating his fists. Go to hell. The battle that followed was unlike anything Kazuki had experienced. These cultists didn't just use shadow magic, they wielded it like living weapons, creating tentacles and spears and barriers that seemed to devour light itself. Gray's ice attacks connected but barely slowed them down, while Lucy's celestial spirit struggled against magic that actively tried to drain their energy. Wendy managed to land a direct hit with her Sky Dragon's roar, but the cultist just absorbed the wind magic and used it to enhance his own speed. Nothing's working, Lucy shouted as Taurus disappeared back to the celestial world, his strength completely drained. That's when Kazuki felt it, a pull from deep inside his chest, like something vast and ancient stirring to life. The spiral mark on his palm flared with brilliant blue light, and suddenly the office was filled with memories that weren't his own. A blonde boy with whisker marks on his cheeks, standing on a massive toad's head. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, and I'm gonna be Hokage someday. The same boy, older now, facing down a man with long black hair and snake-like eyes. I'll bring Sasuke back, no matter what. orange and black chakra swirling around a young man who looked exactly like Kazuki. Sage Mode, a massive nine-tailed fox, its hatred burning like the sun. You think you can control me, boy? The final battle. A serpent the size of a mountain, its scales gleaming with otherworldly malice. I will devour every world, every dimension, until nothing remains but darkness. And then pain, sacrifice, a sealing technique that required everything he had. The memories crashed into Kazuki's consciousness like a tidal wave. He saw his entire previous life in the space of heartbeats. Naruto Uzumaki, the knucklehead ninja who'd become the strongest shinobi in history. Who died fighting an interdimensional threat to save not just his world, but every world. And who had somehow been reborn here in this dimension, just as that ancient threat was beginning to stir again. I remember, he whispered, the words lost in the chaos of battle around him, but the cultists heard him anyway. The leader's black eyes widened with something like fear. Impossible. The seal should have suppressed. Shadow clone technique. 20 perfect duplicates filled the office, each one moving with the fluid precision of a ninja who'd spent decades perfecting his craft. But this time, Kazuki knew exactly what he was doing. This time, the techniques felt like coming home. The cultists tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. Kazuki's clones attacked from every angle with a coordination that was more like a dance than a battle. Hand-to-hand combat, tactical positioning, exploiting weaknesses, everything he'd learned in his previous life flooded back at once. One cultist managed to break through the clone formation and lunged at Lucy with claws wreathed in shadow. Without thinking, Kazuki formed the technique that had been his signature for most of his previous life. Rasengan, the spinning ball of chakra, not wind magic, but pure life energy shaped by will, and technique caught the cultist's center mass and sent him flying through the already broken window. He landed in the street below and didn't get back up. The other two cultists exchanged terrified glances. The sage's power, he's awakening. Retreat, the leader shouted. Warn the others. The bearer has. Kazuki's clone caught him with a spinning heel kick that would have made Rock Lee proud. The cultist crumpled, unconscious before he hit the floor. The office went quiet except for the sounds of battle still raging in the guild hall below. Kazuki dismissed his clones and stared at his hands, trying to process what had just happened. That, Gray said slowly, was definitely not wind magic. No, Kazuki agreed. It wasn't. Makarov was studying him with those ancient eyes that seemed to see straight through to the soul. You remember, don't you, who you were? Naruto Uzumaki. The name felt right on his tongue for the first time since he'd awakened in this world. I am Naruto Uzumaki, the 7th Hokage of Konohagakure in a dimension very different from this one. Hokage? Lucy asked. Leader of my village, strongest ninja in the world. Kazuki Naruto shook his head. This is so confusing. I remember being him, but I also remember being Kazuki. It's like having two sets of memories overlapping in my head. That's because you're both, Levi said from her spot behind the overturned table. Reincarnation doesn't erase who you become, it adds to who you were. The sounds of fighting from downstairs were getting quieter. Either Fairy Tail was winning, or we should help the others, Kazuki said. Can you control these new abilities? Makarov asked. Awakening that much power at once can be dangerous. Kazuki formed a single Rasengan in his palm, the energy perfectly stable and controlled. Yeah, I think so. They made their way downstairs to find the guild hall in ruins, but the battle won. Natsu was standing over 3 unconscious cultists, his fists still wreathed in flame. Urza had corralled another group near the bar, her sword pointed at their throats. Gadgil, who must have arrived during the fight, was using his iron magic to create makeshift restraints. Is everyone okay? Kazuki called out. Few injuries, nothing serious, Urza reported. But we need to talk about what just happened. Your magic signature changed completely during that battle. Before Kazuki could explain, one of the bound cultists started laughing. It was a sound like breaking glass, sharp and wrong. Too late, the cultist gasped between laughs. You think this was our main assault? This was just a test, to see if the bearer would awaken. What are you talking about? Natsu demanded, grabbing the cultist by his robes. The ritual is already in motion. Every moment the bearer's power grows stronger, the seal grows weaker. Soon, Lord Yamada will have enough strength to manifest physically in this dimension. The cultist's smile was full of malice. And when that happens, your precious guild will be the first to burn. Makarov stepped forward, his magical pressure filling the room. Where is your base of operations? Everywhere, the cultist whispered. We are the shadow between worlds, old man. We cannot be stopped. He bit down hard on something, and foam began bubbling from his mouth. Within seconds, he was dead, along with the other captured cultists. Poison capsules, Kazuki realized. They'd been prepared for capture. Well, Kana said from her spot at the bar, somehow having managed to keep her drink safe throughout the entire battle. That's not ominous at all. Master, Kazuki said quietly, I need to tell everyone what I remembered, what we're really dealing with. Makarov nodded. Gather everyone who was here for the battle. They deserve to know what they're fighting for. It took another hour to get the guild hall cleaned up enough for a proper meeting. Kazuki stood in front of the assembled members, about 20 people total, including the core fighters, and tried to figure out how to explain that he was the reincarnation of a ninja from another dimension who died fighting a world-eating serpent god. Just start at the beginning, Lucy said gently. We'll follow along. So he did. He told them about Naruto Uzumaki, the orphan ninja who'd been shunned by his village for containing a powerful demon fox. About how he'd fought and trained and made friends who became like family. About how he'd eventually become strong enough to protect everyone he cared about. And about how, in the end, that hadn't been enough. Yamata no Orochi appeared in our dimension about 2 years before I died, Kazuki explained. It wasn't from our world originally, it was something that traveled between dimensions, consuming magical energy and growing stronger with each world it devoured. I was the only one powerful enough to fight it. What happened? Wendy asked softly. I won, barely, but the only way to stop it was to use a sealing technique that required my life force. I bound myself and Yamada together and cast us into the space between dimensions where we'd both be trapped forever. Kazuki's voice grew quiet, or at least that was the plan. But the seal is breaking, Urzu observed. Yeah. My death weakened it, and apparently my reincarnation here is making it worse. Every time I use my chakra, the energy system from my original world, it creates resonances that Yamada can exploit. So what do we do? Gray asked. I don't know, Kazuki admitted. In my previous life, the sealing technique was a last resort. I don't have the raw power I used to, and I'm not even sure the same methods would work in this dimension. Then we figure out new methods, Natsu said firmly. Right, everyone? The response was immediate and unanimous. Nods, shouts of agreement, and the kind of fierce determination that made Fairy Tail famous throughout Ishkur. You're not facing this alone, Urza declared. None of us are, but this isn't your fight, Kazuki protested. Yamata is my responsibility. Like hell it is, Natsu interrupted. You're our nakama, which means your enemies are our enemies. End of discussion. The certainty in their voices was overwhelming. These people barely understood what they were volunteering for, but they were ready to fight an interdimensional demon god because it threatened someone they cared about. Kazuki felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Even in his previous life, surrounded by friends who'd die for him without question, he'd never felt quite this level of unconditional acceptance. Thank you, he said simply. Don't thank us yet, Makarov said with a slight smile. Thank us after we win. Later that night, after the guild had been secured and the injured treated, Kazuki sat alone on the guild hall's roof, staring up at the stars. The memories of both his lives were settling into something resembling order, but the emotional weight of remembering his entire past was exhausting. He'd been the most powerful ninja in history, and he'd still failed to protect his world completely. What made him think he could do better this time? Brooding doesn't suit you. Lucy climbed up onto the roof and settled beside him, her legs dangling over the edge. At least it doesn't suit the Kazuki I know. Maybe you don't really know me at all, he said quietly. Maybe none of you do. I'm not just some wind mage with memory problems. I'm someone who got his entire world destroyed. Your world wasn't destroyed. You said you saved it. I said I stopped Yamada. That's not the same thing. Kazuki pulled his knees up to his chest. Do you know what it's like, remembering everyone you failed to save? All the people who died because you weren't strong enough, smart enough, fast enough. Lucy was quiet for a moment. No, but I know what it's like to blame yourself for things that weren't your fault. This was my fault, though. If you'd been stronger, you would have found another way, Lucy interrupted. But you did the best you could with what you had. That's all anyone can do. She was right, logically. But logic didn't make the guilt any easier to bear. The worst part is, Kazuki continued, I can feel Yamada getting stronger. Every time I use my chakra, every time I remember something new, the connection between us grows. What if helping me just makes things worse for everyone? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Lucy said firmly. But we're not going to abandon you just because there might be risks. That's not what nakama do. There was that word again, nakama. It meant more than friend, more than ally. It meant family chosen by bond rather than blood. In my previous life, Kazuki said slowly, I had people like that. People who would have followed me into any battle, no matter how hopeless. But I always felt like I had to protect them, like their safety was more important than everything else. And now I'm starting to understand that maybe they wanted to protect me too. That maybe the strongest thing you can do is let people stand beside you instead of always trying to stand in front of them. Lucy smiled. Look at that, character growth. Despite everything, Kazuki found himself smiling back. Don't let it go to your head. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights twinkle below them. Magnolia looked peaceful in the darkness, giving no sign of the battle that had raged through its guild hall just hours before. Kazuki, Lucy's voice was softer now, almost hesitant. When you remembered everything, all your past life memories, did you remember anyone? Special, someone you loved? The question caught him off guard. He thought about it seriously, sifting through Naruto's memories for romantic attachments. There had been crushes, certainly, and people he'd cared about deeply, but no one who'd made him feel the way. No, he said quietly. I don't think I ever found that kind of connection in my previous life. I was too focused on becoming strong enough to protect everyone to really think about protecting someone specifically. Oh, Lucy sounded almost relieved. Good, I mean not good that you were alone, but good that you're not. That there's no one you're missing. She trailed off, clearly flustered, and Kazuki felt something warm unfurl in his chest. Lucy was worried about competing with a memory. She was jealous of a woman who'd never existed, which meant, Lucy, yeah. When this is all over, when we've dealt with Yamada and the cult and all the interdimensional catastrophe stuff, would you like to go on a proper date? Not a job or a guild event, just us. Her smile was radiant. I'd like that very much. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows across the street, red eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. So, the figure whispered to itself in a voice like grinding stone, the bearer has awakened fully and formed bonds with the local mages. Interesting. It stepped deeper into the darkness, its form seeming to merge with the shadows themselves. Lord Yamada will be most pleased with this development. The stronger the bearer's connections, the more power we can drain when we break him. The figure vanished completely, leaving only the faint scent of sulfur and the echo of cruel laughter. High above, Kazuki felt a chill run down his spine and glanced around, his newly awakened senses detecting something wrong. But whatever it was had already disappeared. Everything okay? Lucy asked. Yeah, he said, though his hand unconsciously moved to the spiral mark on his palm. Just thought I felt something. The mark was warm to the touch, pulsing gently like a second heartbeat. A reminder that the seal was weakening and that somewhere in the space between dimensions, an ancient evil was stirring to life. But for now, surrounded by friends who'd chosen to stand with him regardless of the cost, Kazuki allowed himself to hope that this time, the ending might be different. This time, he wasn't fighting alone. The morning after the guild hall attack found Kazuki in the library beneath Fairy Tale, surrounded by stacks of ancient texts and feeling like his head was about to explode. Not from magical backlash this time, but from trying to reconcile two completely different sets of memories that insisted on occupying the same brain. He remembered being Naruto growing up alone, training with Jiraiya-sensei, fighting the Fourth Ninja War. But he also remembered being Kazuki waking up outside Magnolia, joining the guild, that first awkward conversation with Lucy about her rent money. This is giving me a headache, he muttered, rubbing his temples. Join the club, Levi said from across the table, where she was cross-referencing symbols in 3 different languages. I've been up all night trying to find connections between chakra techniques and Ishgur magic theory. So far, the only thing they have in common is that they both give me migraines. Lucy looked up from her own pile of research materials. Find anything useful? Maybe. The energy manipulation is similar. Both systems draw power from within the user rather than from external sources. But chakra seems more structured, like it follows specific pathways through the body. The chakra pathway system, Kazuki confirmed. In my previous life, we called them tenketsu points. There are 361 of them throughout the human body, and they regulate the flow of chakra to different organs and abilities. Levi's eyes lit up with academic excitement. That's fascinating. Ishgur magic theory suggests that magical energy flows through similar pathways, but we've never been able to map them precisely. Can you show us? Before Kazuki could answer, the library door opened and Makarov descended the stairs, followed by Lucy and surprisingly Gadgel. "Morning, Master," Kazuki said. "I thought you were meeting with the council about the attack." "I was. They're sending investigators, but that's not why I'm here." Makarov settled into a chair that looked too small for even his diminutive frame. "I've been thinking about what you told us last night about being reincarnated from another dimension. There's something you should know about fairy tales history." "What kind of something?" Lucy asked suspiciously. "The kind that explains why Kazuki's chakra signature felt familiar when I first found him." Makarov paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. Fairy Tale wasn't the first guild to bear that name. The original Fairy Tale was founded over 400 years ago by a group of refugees from another dimension. The silence that followed was deafening. "Refugees," Kazuki repeated slowly, "from another dimension." Indeed. According to the guild's oldest records, the ones kept in the master's private vault, they came here fleeing a great catastrophe in their home world. A serpent god that devoured magical energy and left entire civilizations as empty husks. Yamata no Orochi. "It had to be. The refugees called themselves the Uzumaki clan," Makarov continued. "Masters of spiral magic and sealing techniques, led by a warrior known as the Spiral Sage." "That's impossible," Kazuki said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew it wasn't. The memories were there, buried deep in Naruto's recollections, stories his mother had told him about their clan's ancient origins, legends dismissed as fairy tales. "The Uzumaki were interdimensional refugees," he whispered. "That's why our sealing techniques were so advanced. We'd been fighting things like Yamada for generations before I was even born." "What happened to them?" Lucy asked. "The original refugees, I mean. They integrated into this world's magical society over several centuries. Most of their bloodline was diluted through marriage with local mages, but a few families maintained the old knowledge." Makarov's expression grew sad. "Until the spiral cult began hunting them down, seeking their techniques for their own purposes." "So when I was reincarnated here," Kazuki said, pieces clicking into place, "I wasn't just randomly dropped into this world. I was called back to where my clan originated. That would be my theory, yes, which means your presence here isn't an accident, it's the world's way of defending itself against an ancient threat." Gadgil, who'd been unusually quiet during this revelation, finally spoke up. "Great, so we're dealing with interdimensional snake gods and genetic destiny. This job just keeps getting better." "There's more," Levy said, pulling out a particularly old tome. "I found references to something called the Spiral Archives, a hidden repository of Uzumaki knowledge that was supposed to be sealed until the clan's greatest warrior returned." "Let me guess," Kazuki said dryly. "It can only be opened by someone with the spiral mark." "Exactly, but here's the interesting part. It's not hidden in some distant land. According to these texts, it's right here in Magnolia, underneath the guild hall." Everyone stared at her. "Underneath us?" Lucy squeaked. "There's a secret ancient archive under the guild." "Apparently so. The original Fairy Tale Guild was built directly on top of it as a way to guard the entrance." Levy looked excited at the prospect of exploring ancient magical knowledge. "We could access it right now if Kazuki's willing." "What kind of knowledge are we talking about?" Kazuki asked. "Advanced sealing techniques, combat applications of chakra manipulation, and something called hybrid magic theory, instructions for combining chakra techniques with local magical systems." That last one caught his attention. If he could blend his ninja abilities with Fairy Tale's magic, he might be able to develop techniques powerful enough to actually threaten Yamada. "All right," he said. "Let's take a look." The entrance to the Spiral Archives was hidden behind a wall in the guild's basement, revealed only when Kazuki pressed his marked palm against what looked like ordinary stone. The wall dissolved like mist, opening onto a staircase that descended much deeper than should have been physically possible. "I hate magic architecture," Gray muttered as they descended. He joined their little expedition along with Natsu, Urza, and Wendy, turning what should have been a small research mission into a full-team exploration. "It's not that bad," Natsu said cheerfully. "At least it's not moving around like that mansion we explored last month." "Please don't give it ideas," Lucy pleaded. The staircase ended in a vast circular chamber carved from black stone, with glowing spiral patterns etched into every surface. At the center stood a pedestal holding what looked like a scroll made from some kind of metallic material. "Whoa," Wendy breathed, staring at the glowing patterns. "The magic here is incredible. It feels ancient but not old, if that makes sense." It did. The energy in the chamber hummed with power that felt both familiar and alien to Kazuki's senses, like coming home to a house you'd never seen before. He approached the pedestal cautiously, half expecting some kind of trap or guardian to activate. But the scroll simply waited, patient as the centuries that had passed since its creation. The moment his fingers touched the metallic surface, information flooded into his mind. Not memories this time, but pure knowledge, techniques, theories, and applications that his clan had developed over millennia of fighting interdimensional threats. The Uzumaki weren't just refugees, he said aloud, processing what he was learning. They were specialists. Their entire culture was built around containing and destroying entities that fed on magical energy. Like Yamada, Urzu observed. Like Yamada, and according to this, every major victory against such creatures required the same thing, a combination of native magic and chakra techniques working in harmony. The scroll continued to download information directly into his consciousness, sealing formulas that could contain interdimensional entities, chakra manipulation techniques that could disrupt magical energy absorption, and most importantly, hybrid combat styles that merged ninja arts with local magical traditions. There's a specific technique here, Kazuki said, his voice growing excited, something called spiral dragon magic. It's designed to combine dragon slayer magic principles with chakra manipulation. Natsu perked up immediately. Dragon slayer magic, I can teach you that. Actually, according to this, it's the other way around. The technique uses chakra to artificially replicate dragon slayer magic properties, then amplifies them through spiral energy manipulation. Kazuki looked up from the scroll. I think I could learn this. How long would it take? Lucy asked. That depends on how quickly I can adapt my chakra system to local magical principles. Could be days, could be weeks. He paused, considering the complexity of what he was seeing. I'm going to need help. The scroll has instructions for training partners, people who can help me balance chakra and magic energies. We volunteer, Natsu said immediately, speaking for the entire group without bothering to ask their opinions. You don't even know what it involves yet. Don't care, we're helping. The certainty in his voice was both touching and terrifying. These people were volunteering to participate in experimental magic that could potentially kill them all, and they were doing it without hesitation. All right, Kazuki said, but we start small, basic chakra sharing exercises before we attempt anything advanced. The training began that afternoon in the cleared space behind the guild hall. Kazuki had spent an hour explaining the theory, how chakra flowed through the body, how it differed from magical energy, and how the two systems could potentially be synchronized. Think of it like learning a new language, he told them. Magic is what you're fluent in, but chakra follows different rules. Instead of drawing power from your magical core, you're generating energy from your physical and spiritual essence combined. That sounds complicated, Wendy said nervously. It is, but you've all got strong enough magical foundations that your bodies should be able to adapt. Kazuki hoped he was right. The scroll hadn't included any warnings about what happened when people without natural chakra pathways tried to force the system to work. He started with Lucy, partly because she'd volunteered and partly because her celestial magic already required precise energy control. Close your eyes and focus on your breathing. Feel for the energy that flows through your body, not your magic, but your life force itself. Lucy's face scrunched in concentration. I think, maybe, it feels different from when I channel magic. That's it. Now try to direct that energy to your hands. It took nearly an hour, but eventually Lucy managed to create a small, unstable ball of chakra in her palm. It flickered and dispersed within seconds, but the fact that she'd managed it at all was remarkable. That was harder than summoning Aquarius, she panted. And you're learning something that usually takes years to master, Kazuki assured her. Try it again, but this time mix in a tiny bit of your celestial magic. The second attempt produced a golden sphere of energy that was visibly more stable than pure chakra. Lucy's magic was helping to structure the unfamiliar energy, giving it form and purpose. Incredible, Levi whispered from her spot taking notes. The magical energy is acting like scaffolding for the chakra manipulation. Natsu was up next, and his results were both impressive and terrifying. His Dragon Slayer magic resonated so strongly with chakra techniques that his first attempt created a spinning fireball the size of a watermelon. Whoa! He juggled the flaming chakra construct between his hands like it was a toy. This is awesome, don't get carried away, Kazuki warned, but he was secretly pleased. If Natsu could learn to combine his fire dragon magic with chakra enhancement, the resulting techniques would be formidable. Gray had more trouble initially, his ice magic seeming to conflict with the warm energy of chakra manipulation. But once he figured out how to use his ice as a focusing medium rather than a magical expression, he started producing remarkably precise chakra techniques. It's like ice sculpting, he explained, creating a chakra construct shaped like a perfect miniature dragon, except the material is pure energy instead of frozen water. Wendy proved to be the most naturally gifted at chakra manipulation, which shouldn't have surprised anyone. Her healing magic already required intimate knowledge of how energy flowed through living bodies, and adapting that understanding to chakra pathways was almost intuitive for her. This could revolutionize healing magic, she said breathlessly, her hands glowing with a soft blue energy that combined her sky dragon magic with basic chakra enhancement. I can feel so much more detail in how injuries affect the body's energy flow. Urza approached the training with typical intensity, treating chakra manipulation like any other combat skill to be mastered. Her results were less flashy than the others, but incredibly controlled. Within 2 hours, she could create chakra-enhanced versions of her basic requip techniques. The energy cost is higher, she noted clinically, but the resulting equipment is noticeably more durable and sharp. By evening, all of them had managed basic chakra manipulation, and several had started developing hybrid techniques that combine their personal magic with Uzumaki energy methods. Kazuki felt a surge of hope watching his friends adapt to these ancient techniques with such determination. Maybe they really could develop something powerful enough to face Yamada. Tomorrow, he told them as they wrapped up for the day, we'll start working on the advanced applications. Fair warning, some of these techniques are going to be dangerous. How dangerous? Lucy asked. Kazuki consulted the scroll, reading through the warnings attached to the more powerful hybrid techniques. Well, one of them is described as potentially fatal if executed improperly, but capable of disrupting interdimensional magical absorption on a massive scale. Sounds fun, Natsu grinned. Natsu, your definition of fun is deeply concerning, Urza said dryly. As the group headed back toward the guild hall, chattering excitedly about their new abilities, Kazuki lingered in the training area. The scroll was still downloading information into his consciousness, and some of what he was learning was deeply troubling. The Uzumaki clan's battle against interdimensional threats hadn't been a single war, it had been an ongoing conflict spanning thousands of years. And in every recorded case, victory had required enormous sacrifice. The strongest techniques in the scroll came with prices that made his stomach clench. Years of life force, permanent loss of magical abilities, techniques that could only be used once because they fundamentally altered the user's spiritual essence. But there was one technique that caught his attention above all others, something called the final spiral seal. According to the descriptions, it was powerful enough to permanently banish entities like Yamada from all dimensions simultaneously. The cost was simple, the user's complete existence across all possible realities, not just death, complete erasure from the cosmic order. Kazuki closed the scroll with shaking hands. He wouldn't tell the others about that technique, not yet. Maybe not ever if they could find another way. But as he walked back toward the guild hall, he felt eyes watching him from the shadows. The sensation raised every instinct Naruto had developed during decades of being hunted by enemies, and Kazuki's hand moved instinctively to where he would have carried kunai in his previous life. "I know you're there," he called out to the darkness. A figure stepped from the shadows, tall, draped in robes that seemed to absorb light, with red eyes that glowed like embers. Unlike the cultists from the previous night, this one radiated power that made the air itself feel thick and oppressive. "Impressive," the figure said in a voice like grinding stone. "The spiral bearer's senses are as sharp as the legends claimed. Let me guess, another recruiter for the cult. I am Cage, first disciple of Lord Yamada. I come not to fight but to offer you truth." Kazuki tensed, chakra already flowing to his hands. "I'm not interested in anything you have to say. Even if I told you that your friends will die because of their association with you," Cage's smile was visible even in the darkness. "Every moment you delay, the seal weakens further. Soon, my lord will have enough power to manifest physically in this dimension. When that happens, he will consume this world entirely, starting with those you care about most. Then I'll stop him. Just like I did before." "With what power?" Cage laughed, the sound echoing off the guild hall walls. "You are a fraction of what you once were, bearer. Your chakra reserves are limited, your techniques untested in this dimension. You cannot even access Sage Mode without risking dimensional collapse." The casual mention of Sage Mode sent ice through Kazuki's veins. How could this thing know about abilities he'd barely remembered himself? "But there is another way," Cage continued. Surrender yourself willingly, allow Lord Yamada to absorb your power cleanly, and your friends will be spared. This world will be spared. My lord will simply move on to the next dimension, leaving this one untouched. You're lying. Am I? Search your memories, bearer. How many worlds did you manage to save in your previous life? How many were consumed while you fought desperately to become strong enough? Cage stepped closer, and Kazuki could feel malevolent energy radiating from him like heat from a forge. You know the truth. You have never been strong enough when it mattered most. The words hit like physical blows because they contained just enough truth to hurt. Kazuki thought about all the people who died during the Fourth Ninja War, all the villages destroyed while he was away training or fighting other battles. 1 week, Cage said, already beginning to fade back into the shadows. I will give you 1 week to consider my offer. After that, Lord Yamada will begin manifesting regardless, and this world will burn. Wait, Kazuki called out, but the figure had already vanished. He stood alone in the darkness, processing what had just happened. Cage had known about Sage Mode, had known details about his previous life that even the cultists shouldn't have had access to, which meant Yamada was more aware of his reincarnation than anyone had realized. And if the serpent could manifest physically in just 1 week, a sound from behind made him spin around, chakra flaring defensively. But it was just Lucy, approaching with a concerned expression. I thought I heard voices, she said. Everything okay? Yeah, Kazuki lied, just thinking out loud. Lucy studied his face in the dim light from the guild hall windows. You're a terrible liar. What happened? Before he could decide whether to tell her the truth, pain shot through his palm. The spiral mark was burning like fire, pulsing with dark energy that definitely wasn't coming from him. Through their connection, he heard it, a voice like the grinding of tectonic plates, full of ancient malice and growing hunger. My vessel awakens, Yamata no Orochi whispered directly into his mind. Soon, little sage. Soon we will finish what we started. The voice faded, leaving Kazuki gasping and clutching his hand. The spiral mark was glowing with dark red energy that made Lucy step back in alarm. Kazuki. What's wrong? It's getting stronger, he managed through gritted teeth. Yamada is getting stronger, and it's using our connection to influence me directly now. This changed everything. If Yamada could communicate through their bond, it could potentially control him as well. Which meant his friends weren't just in danger from external threats, they were in danger from him. 1 week to figure out how to sever a connection that had been forged through death and reincarnation itself. 1 week to become powerful enough to fight an interdimensional god without destroying the world in the process. 1 week to save everyone he cared about or lose them forever. No pressure at all. The summons from the Magic Council arrived at dawn, delivered by a nervous-looking messenger who practically threw the official scroll at Makarov before fleeing like his life depended on it. Well, the guild master said after reading the contents, this is inconvenient timing. Kazuki looked up from his breakfast, still feeling drained from the previous night's encounter with Cage and Yamada's mental intrusion. What kind of inconvenient? The council wants to conduct an official investigation into the unusual magical disturbances originating from Magnolia. They're sending a full inspection team. Makarov's expression was grim. Led by Councilman Org. Is that bad? Lucy asked. Org is thorough, Urza said carefully, and he has very strong opinions about mages who operate outside established magical theory. Which was a diplomatic way of saying that Kazuki's chakra techniques were going to attract exactly the kind of attention they couldn't afford right now. When are they arriving? Kazuki asked. This afternoon. Makarov folded the scroll with more force than necessary, which gives us a few hours to figure out how you're going to explain shadow clones and spinning energy balls to the council without mentioning interdimensional reincarnation. Can't we just tell them the truth? Natsu suggested. About Yamada and the cult and everything. The Magic Council deals with threats to magical society, Urza explained. They're not equipped to handle interdimensional demon gods. At best, they'd panic and make things worse. At worst, they'd try to contain Kazuki as a potential threat. So we lie, Gray said bluntly. We misdirect, Makarov corrected. Kazuki, you're going to need a plausible explanation for your abilities that doesn't involve previous lives or ancient seals. Kazuki rubbed his temples, trying to think through the exhaustion. What if we say I'm a survivor of a lost magical tradition, someone who was taught techniques that have been forgotten by mainstream magic? That could work, Levy said thoughtfully. There are records of several magical disciplines that died out during various conflicts. We could claim you're the last practitioner of something called spiral magic. Spiral magic it is, Makarov agreed. But you'll need to be careful about demonstrations. Show them enough to satisfy their curiosity, but not enough to reveal the true scope of what you can do. Councilman Org arrived precisely at noon, accompanied by 2 assistant investigators and an entourage that screamed official business. He was a thin, severe-looking man with gray hair and the kind of mustache that suggested he took himself very seriously. "Master Makarov," Org said with a perfunctory bow, "I trust you received our message about this investigation." "Of course, Councilman. Fairy Tale is always happy to cooperate with the Council." Makarov's smile was diplomatic but strained. "What exactly are we investigating?" "Unusual magical signatures detected throughout this region over the past week. Energy patterns that don't match any known magical discipline." Org's sharp eyes swept the guild hall, taking in the lingering damage from the cultist attack. "We're particularly interested in speaking with any mages who might have developed innovative techniques recently." Every eye in the guild turned toward Kazuki, who was doing his best to look uninteresting. "That would be me," he said, stepping forward. "Kazuki, I specialize in a form of wind magic called spiral magic." "Spiral magic." Org repeated the term like he was tasting something unpleasant. "I'm not familiar with that discipline." "It's quite rare," Kazuki said carefully. "My techniques focus on rotating air currents and energy manipulation through spiral patterns." One of Org's assistants was already taking notes. "Could you provide a demonstration?" This was the tricky part. Kazuki formed a basic Rasengan in his palm, but kept it small and unstable, more like a spinning ball of wind than the devastatingly powerful technique it actually was. "Interesting," Org observed, circling around to examine the technique from different angles. "The energy formation is unusual, almost like you're creating a self-sustaining vortex." "Something like that," Kazuki agreed, letting the technique dissipate. "It's all about finding the right balance between pressure and rotation. And these duplicate techniques we've heard reports about?" Damn, someone had been talking about his shadow clones. "Wind constructs," Kazuki said smoothly. "I can create temporary duplicates using compressed air and magical energy. They're not very durable." He demonstrated by creating a single shadow clone, but infused it with just enough wind magic to make it look like a sophisticated air construct rather than a living duplicate. The clone waved at the investigators before dissolving into wisps of wind. "Remarkable," one of the assistants breathed. "The level of control required for that technique must be extraordinary." "It takes practice," Kazuki said modestly. Org was studying him with calculating eyes. "Tell me, young man, where did you learn these techniques? We have no record of any spiral magic practitioners in our archives." This was where the story got dangerous. Kazuki had rehearsed this part, but lying to the Magic Council was a serious crime if they caught him. "I was taught by my grandfather," he said. "He was the last of his line, trained in techniques that date back several centuries. When he died, the knowledge came to me." "And this grandfather's name?" "Juroiya," Kazuki said without hesitation. It wasn't technically a lie Juroiya had taught him, just in a different life in a different dimension. He was eccentric, preferred to stay away from official magical society. Org made a note. "We'll need to verify that information." "Good luck," Kazuki thought. He kept to himself. "I doubt there are many records." The investigation continued for another hour, with Org asking increasingly detailed questions about Kazuki's techniques, training, and magical philosophy. Several times, Kazuki felt like he was walking a tightrope over a pit of spikes, but he managed to keep his answers consistent and plausible. Finally, Org seemed satisfied. "Your techniques are certainly unusual, but they appear to fall within acceptable parameters for legal magical practice. However, I'll need you to register your abilities officially with the Council archives." "Of course," Kazuki agreed, though the idea of having his chakra techniques on file with the government made him nervous. As the investigators prepared to leave, Org paused at the guild hall entrance. "One more thing. We've received reports of increased dark magical activity in this region. If you encounter anything unusual, cultists, forbidden magic, interdimensional anomalies, you're to report it immediately." "Interdimensional anomalies?" Makarov asked with just the right amount of curiosity. "Theoretical threats that the Council takes very seriously," Org replied. "Nothing for civilian mages to worry about, of course." The tone suggested that if interdimensional anomalies did become a problem, civilian mages would be evacuated rather than consulted. Which meant the Council had contingency plans for exactly the kind of crisis Kazuki was trying to prevent. After the investigators left, the guild hall erupted in relieved chatter. "That went better than expected," Lucy said. "For now," Urza cautioned, "but if Org becomes suspicious, he'll dig deeper. We need to be careful about using advanced techniques where the council might detect them. Speaking of which, Levy said, approaching with an armload of research materials, I found something disturbing in the archives last night. References to something called Council Protocol 7. What's Protocol 7? Gray asked. Emergency procedures for dealing with threats beyond normal magical classification. It includes authorization for extreme measures against individuals deemed too dangerous for conventional containment. The implications were clear. If the council discovered what Kazuki really was, they might decide he was too much of a threat to leave free. We'll deal with that if it becomes necessary, Makarov said firmly. For now, focus on training and preparation. We have less than a week. That afternoon, while the others continued practicing hybrid techniques in the basement training area, Kazuki found himself alone with Urza in the guild's upper levels. She'd volunteered to help him develop better ways to disguise his chakra abilities as conventional magic. Your technique is impressive, she said, watching him form a chakra-enhanced version of her basic sword techniques. But you're holding back. I have to, if I use too much power, not because of the council, Urza interrupted. You're holding back because you're afraid of what you might become if you don't. The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Ever since remembering his previous life, Kazuki had been conscious of the vast power sleeping within him, abilities that could level mountains or reshape the landscape. In his original world, such power had been necessary for survival. Here, it felt dangerous. In my previous life, he said carefully, I had friends who were consumed by their own power, who became something monstrous because they couldn't control what they'd been given. Like Jello, Urza said quietly. Kazuki looked at her sharply. What? Someone I knew long ago. He was given power he couldn't handle, and it twisted him into something terrible. Urza's expression was distant, lost in painful memories. For years, I blamed myself for not being strong enough to save him from that darkness. What happened to him? He got better eventually, but it took a long time and a lot of people were hurt along the way. Urza focused on Kazuki again. The point is, power doesn't make you a monster. What you choose to do with it does. Easy to say when you haven't spent decades learning techniques designed for war. You think I haven't? Urza's smile was sad. I was trained as a weapon, Kazuki, tortured and conditioned to be an instrument of destruction. Every technique I know was originally meant to kill efficiently and without mercy. Kazuki stared at her, suddenly seeing the scarlet-haired mage in a completely different light. You were a child soldier, something like that. The point is, we all carry darkness from our past. What matters is who we choose to be now, surrounded by people who care about us. She was right, logically. But the fear remained not just of his own power, but of the connection to Yamada that grew stronger every time he accessed his full abilities. There's something else, he said. Last night, Yamada spoke to me directly. Through the connection we share, if that bond gets stronger, then we'll find a way to sever it, Urza said firmly. But running from your own strength won't help anyone. You need to become powerful enough to face this threat, regardless of the risks. Before Kazuki could respond, shouting erupted from the street outside. They rushed to the window to see people running in panic, pointing toward the sky where dark clouds were gathering with unnatural speed. That's not normal weather, Urza observed. The clouds were swirling in spiral patterns, and Kazuki could feel his mark responding to whatever was causing the disturbance. Dark magic, similar to what he'd sensed from the cultists, but magnitudes more powerful. We need to get down there, he said. They made it to the street just as Councilman Org came running around the corner, his official composure completely shattered. Help, he shouted when he spotted them. My assistants, they're trapped. What happened? Urza demanded. We were investigating magical disturbances at the old cathedral when something attacked. Shadow creatures, but not like anything in the council's classifications. They surrounded the building, and my people are still inside. The old cathedral was on the opposite side of Magnolia, about 15 minutes away at a full run, if Org's assistants were trapped there with hostile magical creatures. Show us, Kazuki said. They commandeered one of the guild's emergency carts and raced through the city streets, Org providing a running commentary on what had happened. The readings were off the charts, he said. More powerful than anything we detected during the guild hall investigation. We thought it might be residual energy from some kind of ritual, but when we entered the cathedral. What did you see? Urza asked. Symbols carved into every surface. Fresh symbols, like someone had been working there recently, and then the shadows started moving. By the time they reached the cathedral, the situation was clearly worse than Org had described. The entire building was surrounded by a dome of writhing darkness, and inhuman shapes moved within the shadows like predators stalking prey. "How do we get through that?" Org asked desperately. Kazuki studied the shadow barrier, his enhanced senses detecting the magical signature beneath the surface. It was definitely cult magic, but more sophisticated than anything he'd encountered before. This wasn't just an attack, it was a trap. "They're using your assistance as bait," he realized. "This whole thing is designed to lure me here." "What are you talking about?" Org demanded. "The cult I told you about. They want me alive so they won't kill your people as long as they think I might show up to rescue them." "Then we call for backup. There's no time," Urza said. "Look." The shadow dome was contracting, slowly but steadily. Whatever was inside wouldn't survive much longer. "I have to go in," Kazuki said. "It's the only way." "Not alone," Urza replied. "We do this together. The shadows will drain your magic, then you'll have to protect me with yours." She requipped into her lightning empress armor, electricity crackling around her form. "Besides, you said it yourself, they want you alive. That gives us an advantage." Before Kazuki could argue further, she charged directly at the shadow barrier. The darkness recoiled from her lightning magic, creating a brief opening that they could exploit. "Stay close," Kazuki called out, following her through the gap with chakra spinning around his fists. Inside the cathedral, the situation was even worse than he'd feared. Org's two assistants were trapped in the center of the building, surrounded by shadow creatures that looked like wolves crossed with nightmares. And standing at the altar, conducting some kind of ritual with symbols that made Kazuki's mark burn, was a figure in elaborate robes. "Welcome, Spiral Bearer," the figure called out without turning around. "I am Disciple Moros, we've been expecting you." The trap was sprung, and Kazuki realized with growing dread that this had been planned from the beginning. The council investigation, Org's convenient presence, even the timing of the attack, it was all designed to get him here in this specific place at this specific moment. "What do you want?" he demanded. "To complete the ritual, of course." Moros finally turned around, revealing a face that was more shadow than flesh. "Every moment you delay, the seal weakens further. Soon Lord Yamada will have enough strength to manifest physically, and this world will burn. Not if I stop you first." "With what power?" Moros laughed, the sound echoing off the cathedral walls. "You still hold back, still fear what you might become, but I have no such limitations." The ritual symbols flared with dark light, and the shadow creatures attacked in perfect coordination. But instead of targeting Kazuki directly, they focused on Urza and the trapped council assistants. "Choose wisely, bearer," Moros called out over the sounds of battle. "Save your friends with restraint and watch them die slowly, or embrace your true power and risk becoming the very monster you fear." It was a perfect trap, emotional manipulation, designed to force Kazuki into revealing his full abilities. And the worst part was, it was working. Watching Urza fight desperately against creatures that absorbed her lightning magic while the council assistants screamed in terror, Kazuki felt his careful control beginning to crack. Maybe it was time to stop holding back. The moment Kazuki made that decision, everything changed. Chakra erupted from his body like a golden flame, far more than he'd ever displayed in front of witnesses. The shadow creatures recoiled from the energy, their forms destabilizing in the presence of such concentrated life force. Multi-shadow clone technique, 50 perfect duplicates filled the cathedral, each one moving with deadly precision. They engaged the shadow creatures in coordinated strikes while Kazuki himself advanced on Moros, who was still conducting his ritual with increasing desperation. "Impressive," the cult disciple said, but too late. "The ritual is nearly complete." The symbols carved into the cathedral walls were glowing brighter now, resonating with some kind of interdimensional energy. Through the connection to his spiral mark, Kazuki could feel Yamada's presence growing stronger. Rasengan, the spinning ball of chakra, caught Moros in the shoulder, sending him flying away from the altar. But the damage was already done, the ritual had reached critical mass. A tear opened in the air above the altar, revealing glimpses of a realm filled with scales and burning eyes. Something massive was moving on the other side, pressing against the dimensional barrier. "So close," Yamada's voice whispered through the connection. "Just a little more, my vessel. Just a little more, and I will be free to devour this delicious world." The mental contact was stronger than ever before, and Kazuki felt his consciousness being pulled toward that burning presence. For a terrifying moment, he was no longer in the cathedral, but floating in a void filled with the serpent's malevolent intelligence. "You cannot resist forever," Yamada continued. Every time you use our shared power, you make the bond stronger. Soon, you will simply be another part of me. Never, Kazuki managed through gritted teeth. We shall see. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Kazuki gasping and disoriented in the cathedral. The dimensional tier was still growing, and he could hear something enormous moving beyond it. Kazuki, Urza called out. Whatever you're going to do, do it fast. There was only one technique powerful enough to close a dimensional rift of this magnitude. One of the advanced sealing methods from the Uzumaki archives, designed specifically for containing interdimensional threats. But using it would require channeling more chakra than he'd ever attempted in this body, and strengthen his connection to Yamada even further. The choice was simple: risk his own soul to save this world, or watch helplessly as an ancient evil poured through into reality. Kazuki formed the complex hand seals for the most dangerous technique he knew, hoping he was strong enough to survive what came next. Interdimensional sealing technique, spiral barrier. The cathedral exploded with golden light. The golden light faded, leaving Kazuki collapsed on the cathedral floor with blood trickling from his nose and ears. The dimensional tier was gone, sealed away by raw chakra and willpower, but the cost had been enormous. Kazuki, Urza's voice sounded distant, like she was calling from the bottom of a well. Stay with us, he tried to respond, but his body wasn't cooperating. The interdimensional sealing technique had drained more chakra than he'd ever channeled before, and something else was happening. Memories were surfacing with violent intensity, triggered by the massive energy expenditure. Not memories, he realized dimly. The complete record, everything. The world dissolved around him. He was 7 years old, standing alone on a swing while the other children played together. Stay away from him, their parents whispered. He's got the demon fox inside him. Training with Kakashi-sensei, learning the basics of chakra control by walking on trees and water. You have more chakra than anyone I've ever met, his teacher said. But raw power means nothing without control. The Chunin exams, facing Neji, who believed in destiny and predetermined fate. I'm going to change the Hyuga clan, he declared. And I'm going to become Hokage, meeting Jiraiya for the first time. The old pervert who taught him everything about being a ninja, about protecting people you care about never giving up no matter how hopeless things seemed. The Valley of the End, fighting Sasuke, his best friend who'd chosen darkness over bonds. I'll break every bone in your body if that's what it takes to bring you home, training in Sage mode on Mount Myoboku. Learning to balance natural energy with his own chakra, becoming something more than human, but never losing sight of what made him who he was. The Fourth Ninja War. Fighting alongside everyone he'd ever cared about against an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. This is what it means to be Hokage, protecting everyone, no matter the cost, becoming Hokage. Standing on top of the mountain, looking down at the village he'd sworn to protect. The weight of responsibility, heavier than any jutsu he'd ever learned. And then, the final battle. The memory crystallized with perfect clarity, no longer filtered through the haze of reincarnation. Kazuki experienced it as if he were living it again, every sensation sharp as a blade. Konohagakure, 2 years ago the sky above the village was torn like paper, revealing glimpses of something vast and terrible beyond. Yamata no Orochi had found their dimension at last, drawn by the massive chakra signature of the tailed beasts. It's too big, Sakura shouted over the roar of interdimensional wind. How are we supposed to fight something like that? The serpent's head alone was the size of a mountain, scales gleaming with otherworldly malice. Its eyes burned like dying stars, and its voice shook the very foundations of reality. I smell Chahkra, it rumbled, the words causing buildings to crumble. Delicious Chahkra. I will devour your world slowly, savoring every drop of power. Naruto stood atop the Hokage monument, golden chakra cloak rippling around him as he entered his most powerful form. 6 Paths Sage Mode, the technique that made him nearly godlike in power. But even with Kurama's full cooperation and the blessing of the Sage of 6 Paths, he felt small compared to the interdimensional horror before them. Everyone stay back, he called to the assembled shinobi. This isn't a fight you can help with. Like hell, Sasuke appeared beside him, Rinnegan blazing with determination. We've faced impossible odds before, not like this team. This thing eats dimensions for breakfast. But Sasuke was already moving, Susanoo forming around him like armor made of purple energy. Then we'll just have to give it indigestion. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Naruto and Sasuke fought with perfect coordination, their combined techniques capable of reshaping the landscape. but Yamada absorbed every attack, growing stronger with each jutsu that connected. "It is useless," the serpent laughed, its tail swatting aside a mountain-sized Rasengan like it was a soap bubble. "I have devoured the CHAH Kara of entire WRLDS. Your power is merely an appetizer." That's when Naruto realized the terrible truth. Yamada wasn't just immune to chakra attacks, it was specifically evolved to consume them. Every technique they used was making it stronger. "We can't win this way," he told Sasuke during a brief lull in the fighting. "Then what do you suggest?" Naruto looked at his best friend, his rival, his brother in all but blood. The answer was clear, even though it meant losing everything. "The dead demon consuming seal," he said quietly, but modified. "Instead of just sealing Yamada away, we seal ourselves with it. Trap it in the space between dimensions where it can't reach any world." Sasuke's eyes widened. "That's suicide. Permanent suicide. You'd be erased from existence itself. Better than watching it devour every world in the multiverse. There has to be another way." "Enough," Yamada roared, lunging toward the village with jaws that could swallow Konoha whole. "I grow tired of this game." There was no more time for discussion. Naruto formed the hand seals for the most forbidden technique in Uzumaki history, the one that required a sacrifice so complete it transcended death itself. "Naruto, don't," Kurama's voice echoed in his mind. "If you do this, there won't be anything left to reincarnate. You'll be gone forever." "Not forever," Naruto replied, chakra beginning to spiral around him in patterns that hurt to look at. "I'll find a way back. I always do." The technique activated just as Yamada's jaws closed around the Hokage monument. But instead of devouring the village, the serpent found itself pulled into a vortex of golden energy that tore holes in reality itself. "What are you doing?" it shrieked, its massive form being drawn inexorably toward Naruto's position. "What I have to do," Naruto said, feeling his very existence beginning to unravel. "To protect everyone I care about." The last thing he saw before everything went white was Hinata's face, tears streaming down her cheeks as she reached toward him. He tried to speak to tell her he loved her, but the words were lost in the interdimensional maelstrom. And then there was nothing. Magnolia Cathedral, present-day Kazuki gasped back to consciousness, the complete memory burning in his mind like acid. Around him, the cathedral was in ruins, but his friends were safe. Urza was kneeling beside him, her armor cracked from the battle. Lucy and the others had arrived at some point during his unconsciousness, drawn by the magical disturbance. "How long was I out?" he asked weakly. "About 10 minutes, Lucy said, her voice tight with worry. "But Kazuki, your magical signature went completely insane. We could feel it from the guild hall." Councilman Org was standing nearby, staring at the spot where the dimensional tear had been. His assistants were conscious and unhurt, but clearly shaken by their experience. "That technique," Org said slowly, "I've never seen anything like it. The amount of power required to close an interdimensional rift." "I got lucky," Kazuki said, struggling to sit up. The ritual was already unstable. It was a lie, and judging by the looks on his friends' faces, they knew it. But Org seemed to accept the explanation, probably because the alternative was too disturbing to consider. "We'll need a full report," Org said. "But for now, let's focus on securing the scene and making sure there are no other cultist cells in the city." After the council investigators left to coordinate their search efforts, Kazuki found himself alone with Team Natsu in the ruined cathedral. They were all looking at him with expressions that mixed concern with something approaching awe. "All right," Urza said finally. "What really happened in there? And don't tell us you got lucky. That technique was way beyond anything we've seen from you before." Kazuki closed his eyes, trying to figure out how to explain what he'd remembered without traumatizing everyone. "I remember how I died. In my previous life, I mean, the complete story." "And," Lucy prompted gently, "Yamata no Orochi appeared in my dimension 2 years before my death. It had been traveling between worlds, consuming magical energy and growing stronger with each reality it devoured." Kazuki's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "I was the only one powerful enough to face it directly." "What happened?" Wendy asked. "I won. Barely. But the only way to stop it permanently was to use a sealing technique that required my complete existence as the price. I bound myself and Yamada together and cast us into the void between dimensions." The silence that followed was deafening. "So you died to save your world," Gray said slowly. "And now the seal is breaking because you're alive again. More than that, every time I use my chakra abilities, it creates resonances that Yamada can exploit. The stronger I become, the faster the seal deteriorates." Kazuki looked around at their faces, seeing the dawning understanding. Which means I'm not just a target, I'm actively making the problem worse by existing. That's not your fault, Lucy said fiercely. You didn't ask to be reincarnated. Maybe not. But I'm still responsible for what happens next. Kazuki pulled out the metal scroll from the archives, which he'd been carrying since the morning. According to the Uzumaki records, there are 3 ways to deal with an interdimensional entity like Yamada. What are they? Urza asked. First option, complete the original seal by sacrificing myself again. Problem is, I don't have the same power level I had in my previous life, so there's no guarantee it would work. Not happening, Natsu said immediately. Next option, sever the connection between us entirely. But according to this, that would require destroying the part of my soul that carries Naruto's memories and abilities. I'd survive, but I wouldn't be me anymore. Also not happening, Lucy added firmly. Third option, become powerful enough to destroy Yamada permanently instead of just sealing it away. But that would require mastering techniques that could potentially tear holes in reality if I lose control. Gray rubbed his temples. So our choices are, you die, you lose everything that makes you who you are, or you risk destroying the world by accident while trying to save it. Pretty much, yeah. Well, Natsu said with his usual grin, when you put it like that, the answer's obvious. We help you get strong enough to kick this snake's ass once and for all. Natsu, no arguments. You're our nakama, which means we're in this together. Natsu's expression became unusually serious. Besides, you said it yourself, this thing devours entire worlds. If it gets loose here, everyone we care about dies anyway. The techniques I'd need to learn are incredibly dangerous, Kazuki warned. Even practicing them could cause magical disasters, and if I lose control, then we'll help you stay in control, Urza said simply. That's what teams are for. Looking around at their faces determined, scared, but absolutely certain, Kazuki felt something shift inside his chest. In his previous life, he'd always carried the burden of protecting others alone, but these people weren't asking him to protect them. They were asking to fight beside him. All right, he said, but if we're doing this, we're doing it right. Full disclosure about everything, the techniques, the risks, the potential consequences. And at the first sign that I'm losing control, you get as far away from me as possible. Deal, Lucy said immediately. There's one more thing, Kazuki continued, consulting the scroll again. The advanced techniques require multiple practitioners working in perfect synchronization. I can't learn them alone. Meaning you'd have to learn them too. Advanced chakra manipulation, hybrid magic theory, techniques that could kill you if executed improperly. He looked each of them in the eye. I won't ask any of you to take that risk. You're not asking, Wendy said quietly. We're volunteering. All of us, Gray added. The certainty in their voices was both humbling and terrifying. These people were willing to risk their lives learning experimental magic because they trusted him enough to believe it was necessary. Before Kazuki could respond, the cathedral's stained glass windows exploded inward, showering them with multicolored fragments. Dark energy poured through the openings like thick smoke, coalescing into humanoid shapes with burning red eyes. More cultists, Lucy observed grimly. No, Kazuki said, feeling his spiral mark burn with recognition. Something worse. The largest of the shadow figures spoke in a voice like grinding stone. The bearer has remembered. Lord Yamada is pleased. It was Cage, the first disciple, but his form was more substantial now, more real. The dimensional barriers were weakening faster than anyone had expected. Every memory you recover strengthens our connection, Cage continued. Every technique you practice brings us closer to manifestation. You cannot win, bearer. You can only delay the inevitable. Want to bet? Natsu snarled, flames erupting around his fists. By all means, Cage smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. Test your strength against servants who have been blessed by Lord Yamada's power directly. The shadow figures attacked with inhuman speed and coordination. But this time, they weren't trying to capture Kazuki. They were trying to force him to use his most powerful techniques, accelerating the breakdown of the dimensional seal. Don't use advanced chakra, Kazuki shouted to his teammates. They're trying to make the connection stronger, but fighting these enhanced cultists with basic techniques was like trying to stop a landslide with bare hands. Within minutes, it was clear they were outmatched. Kazuki watched Urza get thrown across the cathedral by a shadow tendril, watched Gray's ice attacks get absorbed by creatures that shouldn't exist, watched Lucy struggle to maintain her celestial spirits against magic that actively drained their energy. His friends were going to die unless he did something, and there was only one technique powerful enough to make a difference. The choice was simple: let his nakama be slaughtered or use his full power and risk giving Yamada exactly what it wanted. Chakra erupted from Kazuki's body like a golden sun as he entered the incomplete version of Sage mode he could manage in this dimension. The shadow creatures recoiled from the energy, but Cade's laughter echoed through the cathedral. Yes. More, show us the true depth of your power. Through the connection to Yamada, Kazuki could feel the ancient evil stirring with renewed strength. Every technique he used was feeding it, making it stronger, bringing it closer to full manifestation. But his friends were safe, and that was what mattered. You cannot protect them forever, Cage said, already beginning to fade back into the shadows. We have Eternity Bearer. How long can you resist? The cultists vanished, leaving the ruined cathedral quiet except for the sound of everyone catching their breath. Well, Gray said finally, that could have gone better. How long do we have? Lucy asked. Kazuki consulted the scroll, cross-referencing the symptoms of seal degradation with what he'd just experienced. At the current rate of deterioration, maybe 3 days before Yamada can manifest physically in this dimension. 3 days to master techniques that normally take years to learn, Urza observed. That's not much time. Then we better get started, Natsu said with grim determination. As they prepared to leave the ruined cathedral, none of them noticed the small spiral symbol that had been carved into the altar during the battle. It pulsed once with dark red light, then went dormant. Somewhere in the void between dimensions, Yamata no Orochi smiled with anticipation. Soon, Kazuki woke to the guild hall shaking like it was caught in an earthquake, except the tremors felt wrong, too rhythmic, too purposeful. Like something massive was trying to claw its way out of the earth itself. What the hell? Gray's voice was cut off as another tremor sent books flying from the shelves around their makeshift sleeping area in the basement. They'd been camping in the archives for the past 2 days, practicing the advanced hybrid techniques from the Uzumaki scroll. The progress had been remarkable. Lucy could now create chakra-enhanced celestial spirits. Natsu's fire had taken on properties that could burn through dimensional barriers, and Gray's ice could freeze magical energy itself. But it wasn't enough, not nearly enough for what they were facing. Everyone up, Makarov's voice echoed down the stairs, magically amplified and tight with urgency. Emergency assembly. Now, they stumbled upstairs to find the main guild hall in chaos. Every S-class mage was present, along with most of the other teams, and Makarov stood at the center with a communication lacrima crystal that was crackling with multiple incoming messages. What's the situation? Urza asked, already requipping into her armor. Magical creatures across Fior have gone completely berserk, Makarov announced grimly. Reports are coming in from every major city: dragons attacking Crocus, giant serpents destroying Port Harjan, and things that don't match any known classifications tearing through the countryside. Levy looked up from a stack of reports she was speed-reading. It's not just Fior. Similar incidents are being reported across Ishkur, Alakatasia, even the remote islands. Every magical creature with enough power to be dangerous has suddenly turned hostile. Kazuki felt his spiral mark burning with recognition. It's starting. Yamada's partial awakening is disrupting the natural magical balance. How is that possible? Wendy asked. Think of Yamada as a black hole for magical energy, Kazuki explained, consulting the scroll while trying to ignore the growing pain in his palm. As it gets stronger, it starts pulling power from everything around it. The creatures aren't going berserk, they're being drained, and they're attacking in desperation. Another tremor shook the guild hall, stronger this time. Through the windows, they could see people running in the streets as unnatural storm clouds gathered overhead. The Magic Council is coordinating a multi-guild response, Makarov continued. Every available mage is being mobilized to contain the situation until we can find the source. We know the source, Natsu pointed out, big snake god trying to eat the world. But we can't explain that to the other guilds without revealing information that could cause mass panic, Urza said. They'll have to settle for unknown magical phenomenon. The communication lacrima crackled to life, showing the image of a harried-looking council member. All guild masters, we have a Code 7 situation in Magnolia. Something is manifesting in the forest north of the city magical signature, unlike anything in our records. Code 7. Kazuki remembered Levy mentioning that classification threats beyond normal magical containment. Visual confirmation? Makarov asked. The image shifted to an aerial view of the forest, and everyone in the guild hall went silent. A section of woodland roughly the size of several city blocks had been transformed into something that looked like it belonged on an alien world. The trees were twisted into spiral shapes, their bark gleaming with scales, and the very air seemed to writhe with dark energy. Partial manifestation, Kazuki whispered. Yamada is trying to create a foothold in this dimension. Can you stop it? Lucy asked. Maybe, but Kazuki hesitated, then decided honesty was more important than optimism. Every time I use my full power, I make the connection stronger. If I stop this manifestation, I might accelerate the next one. The moral dilemma was crystal clear. Help now and risk making things worse later, or let innocent people suffer while they searched for a better solution that might not exist. How many people live near that forest? Gray asked quietly. About 3,000, Levy answered after consulting a map. More if you count the surrounding farms. 3,000 people who would die if that manifestation expanded. 3,000 people whose lives depended on a choice Kazuki didn't want to make. The decision is yours, Makarov said gently. But whatever you choose, Fairy Tail will stand with you. Before Kazuki could respond, Gadgel spoke up from near the door. Hate to interrupt the moral crisis, but we got bigger problems. Look outside. They rushed to the windows to see creatures unlike anything in the magical world's bestiary stalking through Magnolia's streets. Shadow wolves the size of bears, serpents made of living darkness, and things that hurt to look at directly were emerging from the sewers and alleyways. The manifestation is expanding, Kazuki realized. And it's creating spawn. People are dying out there, Natsu said bluntly. Right now, whatever the long-term consequences are, we deal with them later. He was right. The philosophical debate about future risks was meaningless if there was no future to worry about. All right, Kazuki said, feeling the decision settle in his chest like a stone. We stop this thing. All of us together. Finally, Natsu grinned, flames erupting around his fists. I was getting tired of all the planning and worrying. Let's go punch some interdimensional evil. The battle for Magnolia began before they even reached the forest. Shadow creatures had spread throughout the city, attacking anything with magical energy. But these weren't the relatively weak spawn they'd faced in previous encounters. These things had been enhanced by Yamada's partial manifestation, making them stronger, faster, and far more dangerous. Formation 7, Urza called out as they moved through the streets. Protect the civilians first, then push toward the manifestation site. Kazuki found himself at the center of a moving formation that showcased everything they'd learned over the past few days. Lucy's chakra-enhanced celestial spirits could actually damage the shadow creatures, while Natsu's hybrid fire techniques burned through their dimensional defenses. Gray's ice could freeze their magical energy, and Wendy's wind attacks could disrupt their cohesion entirely. But it was the coordination that made the difference. Instead of the usual chaotic fairy tale approach of everyone attacking independently, they moved like a military unit, Kazuki's tactical mind guiding their movements while their individual strengths covered each other's weaknesses. Behind you, Kazuki called out, and Lucy spun without hesitation to counter an attack she hadn't even seen coming. The trust was absolute. Left flank opening up, Gray responded to Kazuki's warning by creating ice barriers that funneled the creatures into Natsu's attack range. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, the perfect marriage of ninja tactical doctrine and fairy tale's emotional bonds. They fought their way through 3 miles of infested city streets, rescuing trapped civilians and clearing safe zones for the evacuation teams. Other guild members were doing the same throughout Magnolia, creating a coordinated response that was actually working. But as they got closer to the forest, the opposition grew stronger. The shadow creatures were being reinforced by things that definitely weren't Spawn cult members who had been transformed by direct contact with Yamada's power. Those used to be human, Wendy said with horror, looking at creatures that still wore the remnants of dark robes but had scales instead of skin and eyes that burned like coals. Voluntary transformation, Kazuki said grimly. They've given themselves completely to Yamada's influence. Can they be saved? Lucy asked. I don't know, but right now they're trying to kill innocent people, so the philosophical questions will have to wait. The transformed cultists fought with intelligence and coordination that normal Spawn lacked. They used actual tactics, setting traps and ambushes that would have been devastating against conventional mages. But they hadn't accounted for Kazuki's strategic experience or his team's hybrid abilities. Wendy, Sky Enhancement on Natsu. Gray, Ice Cage Formation Delta. Lucy, I need Virgo for underground reconnaissance. The orders came fast and precise, each one designed to counter specific threats he could see developing. Move, the result was a battle that looked more like a dance than a fight. Each team member knew exactly where the others would be, exactly what they were doing, exactly how their abilities would interact. Shadow creatures that should have been overwhelming found themselves outmaneuvered and outfought by mages who moved with perfect synchronization. This is incredible, Lucy panted during a brief lull in the fighting. I've never felt this coordinated with anyone. Military precision with fairy tale's heart, Urza observed with approval. An interesting combination. But the real test came when they reached the forest itself. The manifestation site was worse than the aerial view had suggested. What had once been a peaceful woodland was now a nightmare landscape of twisted reality. The ground pulsed like living flesh, trees had grown into shapes that resembled massive vertebrae, and the air itself seemed thick with malevolent intelligence. At the center of it all was a pool of what looked like liquid shadow, surrounded by cultists chanting in a language that made reality shiver. And rising from the pool was something that made everyone's blood run cold. A serpent's head the size of a building, covered in scales that reflected light that had never existed. Its eyes were windows into cosmic hatred, and when it spoke, the words bypassed the ears entirely and echoed directly in their minds. Finally, Yamada no Orochi said, its voice shaking the foundations of the world. I can taste this dimension's delicious magical energy. Oh hell, Gray muttered, it's already manifesting physically. Only partially, Kazuki said, studying the manifestation with senses honed by 2 lifetimes of combat experience. The body is still mostly in the interdimensional void if we can disrupt the anchor points. The cultists, Lucy realized, they're maintaining the connection. Exactly, we stop them, we force Yamada back into the void. At least temporarily. And how do we stop cultists who have been transformed by cosmic snake god power? Natsu asked. Very carefully, Kazuki replied, already forming the hand seals for his most dangerous technique. Everyone stay back, I'm going to need to use techniques that could hurt you if you're too close. Like hell, Natsu said immediately. We're doing this together, remember. Natsu, this isn't like the training exercises. If I lose control of this technique, then we'll help you stay in control, Urza interrupted firmly. That's what teams are for. Looking around at their faces scared but determined, trusting him despite the enormous risks, Kazuki felt something shift inside his chest. These people weren't just willing to fight beside him, they were insisting on it, even when it would be safer for everyone if he handled the threat alone. All right, he said, but we do this smart. Coordinated assault on the anchor points while I keep Yamada distracted, and if I give the signal to retreat, we retreat, Lucy agreed. Together. The battle for reality itself was about to begin. The moment they moved into the manifestation zone, everything went wrong. The transformed cultists detected their approach immediately, abandoning their chanting to attack with inhuman speed and coordination. But worse, the partial manifestation of Yamada began actively trying to drain their magical energy, making every technique more difficult and exhausting. It's like fighting in thick mud, Gray complained, his ice attacks forming slower than usual. The manifestation is creating an energy vacuum, Kazuki explained while dodging shadow tendrils that erupted from the corrupted ground. It's trying to weaken us before the real fight begins. Yamada's massive head turned toward them, eyes focusing with predatory interest. My vessel arrives. Come closer, little sage. Let me show you what I have learned from our connection. The serpent opened its jaws and something far worse than fire poured out. It was pure void, an absence so complete it ate light, sound, and hope itself. The attack carved a trench through the corrupted forest that simply ceased to exist. Move, Kazuki shouted, grabbing Lucy and diving behind a twisted tree that provided minimal cover. The void beam passed inches from their position, and he could feel it trying to drain the chakra from his body. New plan, he said grimly. We can't fight that thing directly. We need to hit the cultists fast, before it can charge up another attack like that. How fast? Natsu asked, flames dancing around his fists with determined intensity. Very. Kazuki formed shadow clones, but instead of his usual handful, he created dozens. The energy drain from the manifestation made it difficult but manageable. Saturation assault. Overwhelm their defenses while the original anchor points are vulnerable. The clones spread out through the corrupted forest with tactical precision, each one targeting a specific cultist while the originals moved toward the central manifestation pool. It should have worked perfectly, but Yamada had been learning from their connection and it had prepared a counter-strategy. Clever, the serpent said with approval, but insufficient. Observe, the partially manifested god exhaled again, but instead of void energy, it released something far more insidious, a fog that shimmered with familiar spiral patterns. That's my chakra, Kazuki realized with growing horror. It's using our connection to replicate my techniques. The fog settled over his shadow clones, and instead of dispelling them, it began corrupting them. One by one, his duplicates turned against their targets, their familiar techniques twisted into instruments of malevolent will. "It's taking control of your clones," Lucy shouted. "Dispel them." "I can't. The connection is being maintained by Yamada's power, not mine." Kazuki watched in horror as his own techniques were turned against innocent people. This was his worst nightmare, his power being used to hurt the people he was trying to protect. "Then we adapt," Urza said firmly, requipping into her lightning empress armor. "Close combat. No techniques that can be corrupted." But even as she spoke, Yamada's influence spread further. The spiral fog began affecting their other abilities too. Lucy's celestial spirits flickered in and out of existence as their summoning contracts were interfered with. Gray's ice began forming in patterns that matched Yamada's scale designs, and Wendy's wind attacks started carrying whispers in that reality-shaking language. "It's not just copying techniques," Kazuki realized with dawning dread. "It's corrupting our entire magical system. Everything we do is being filtered through its influence." "So what do we do?" Natsu demanded, his flames sputtering as they took on colors that shouldn't exist. The answer was as clear as it was terrifying. There was only one way to fight an enemy that could corrupt any technique they used against it. "We don't use techniques," Kazuki said quietly. "We use raw will." He dismissed his remaining chakra techniques entirely, letting the energy settle back into his core in its most basic form. No jutsu, no advanced manipulation, just pure life force directed by determination alone. "Follow my lead," he told his teammates. "Strip everything back to its most fundamental level. Don't try to be clever or efficient, just be yourselves as purely as possible." What happened next was unlike any battle in recorded magical history. Instead of complex spells and sophisticated techniques, they fought with the most basic expressions of their individual natures. Natsu's fire became simple heat and light, driven by his refusal to give up. Gray's ice became protection and barriers, shaped by his need to shield others. Lucy's magic became pure emotional connection to beings who cared about her. Wendy's wind became the breath of life itself, untainted by any agenda beyond healing. And Kazuki's chakra became what it had always been at its core, the spiral of life energy that connected all living things. The corrupted clones couldn't adapt to techniques that weren't really techniques. Yamada's influence could twist complex magical formulas, but it couldn't corrupt emotions, determination, or the fundamental will to protect others. "Impossible," the serpent roared as its cultists began falling to attacks that shouldn't have been able to pierce their defenses. "How are you resisting MY corruption?" "Because you're trying to corrupt our techniques," Kazuki replied, his simple spirals of chakra disrupting one anchor point after another. "But you can't corrupt who we are." The battle turned decisively in their favor within minutes. Without the complex techniques that Yamada could twist, the team fought with a purity and coordination that the partially manifested god couldn't counter. Each cultist that fell weakened the manifestation anchor, forcing more of Yamada's essence back into the interdimensional void. "No," the serpent's voice was filled with fury and growing desperation. "I will not be denied. I have waited too long." The massive head began sinking back into the shadow pool as its connection to this dimension weakened. But instead of retreating gracefully, Yamada made one final, desperate gambit. One of the remaining cultists, a woman whose transformation was more complete than the others, suddenly straightened and spoke in a voice that was unmistakably the serpent's own. "Enough games, little vessel," she said, Yamada's cosmic malevolence pouring through her human throat. "I grow tired of these delays." The possessed cultist looked directly at Kazuki with eyes that burned like dying stars. "You have one choice remaining. Surrender yourself willingly, allow me to consume your power cleanly, and I will spare this world. Continue to resist, and I will manifest fully in 7 days, regardless of the cost to reality itself." "And if I surrender?" Kazuki asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then I will consume this dimension slowly, savoring every drop of magical energy before moving on to the next world." Yamada's smile was visible even through the possessed woman's features. "Your friends will live to see the end of everything they hold dear." The ultimatum hung in the air like a physical weight. Surrender and watch the world die slowly, or continue fighting and risk catastrophic manifestation in a week. 7 days, the possessed cultist repeated. "Choose wisely, vessel. The next time we meet, there will be no more delays." The woman collapsed, her connection to Yamada severed as the manifestation finally lost cohesion. The corrupted forest began returning to normal, twisted trees, straightening and scale-covered ground, resuming its natural texture. But the serpent's final words echoed in everyone's minds with the weight of absolute certainty. 7 days until full manifestation. 7 days to find a way to destroy something that had devoured entire dimensions. 7 days to save the world or watch it burn. Well, Gray said finally, breaking the oppressive silence. At least we have a deadline now. 7 days, Lucy repeated numbly. How are we supposed to become strong enough to fight that thing in 7 days? Kazuki looked around at his teammates, exhausted, scared, but still standing together despite everything they'd just faced. The answer to Lucy's question was simple, even if the execution would be nearly impossible. We're going to need help, he said. A lot of help, from every guild in Fior, probably every guild in Ishkur. Think they'll believe us? Natsu asked. After what just happened here, after magical creatures going berserk across 3 continents. Kazuki gestured toward Magnolia, where the emergency response teams were still dealing with shadow spawn throughout the city. Yeah, I think they'll believe us. And if they don't, Wendy asked quietly, then we face the end of the world with the people who matter most to us, Urza said simply. Just like always. As they began the long walk back toward Magnolia, none of them noticed the small spiral symbols that had been carved into trees throughout the forest during Yamada's partial manifestation. The marks pulsed once with dark red light, creating a network of anchor points that would make the next manifestation faster, stronger, and far more difficult to disrupt. Somewhere in the space between dimensions, Yamato no Orochi coiled around itself in satisfaction. 7 days. The endgame was about to begin. Kazuki stood in his small apartment above the guild hall, staring at the packed travel bag on his bed. Outside his window, the first light of dawn was creeping across Magnolia's rooftops, but he hadn't slept. How could he, knowing that in 6 days Yamada would manifest fully and tear this world apart? The decision had crystallized during the long, sleepless night. Every moment he stayed here put his guildmates in greater danger. Yamada's partial manifestation had proven that the serpent could track him anywhere, corrupt any technique he used, and turn his own power against the people he cared about most. There had to be another way. Some technique in the Uzumaki archives he hadn't found yet, some approach that didn't require risking everyone he'd grown to love. But he'd need space to research it properly, away from populated areas where a mistake could kill thousands. Away from Fairy Tale, the soft knock on his door made him wince. He'd hoped to leave before anyone woke up. Kazuki, Lucy's voice was quiet, concerned. Can I come in? It's open, he said, not trusting himself to look at her. Lucy stepped inside, still wearing her pajamas and looking like she'd slept about as well as he had. Her eyes immediately went to the travel bag. Going somewhere? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Lucy, I can't stay here. You saw what happened yesterday. Yamada is getting stronger, and every time I use my power, I make things worse. If I stay in Magnolia, you'll what? Face this alone like some kind of martyr? Lucy's voice was sharp with anger. That's not what Nakama do, Kazuki. This isn't about what Nakama do. The words came out harsher than he'd intended. This is about keeping you safe. All of you, do you understand what Yamada will do if it manifests fully? It won't just kill you, it'll consume your magical energy while you're still alive, drain everything that makes you who you are until there's nothing left but empty husks. Lucy flinched at the description, but her expression didn't waver. Then we'll stop it together. How? Kazuki turned to face her fully, letting her see the desperation he'd been hiding. I'm not strong enough, Lucy. In my previous life, I had decades to prepare, the most powerful allies in my world, and I still barely managed to seal it away. Here, I'm working with a fraction of that power and 6 days to figure out a permanent solution. So we get creative. We find another way. There is no other way. The frustration that had been building all night finally exploded. I've read every technique in the Uzumaki archives, studied every historical account of fighting interdimensional entities. The math is simple. Either I sacrifice myself to reinforce the seal, or I become powerful enough to destroy Yamada outright. And that second option requires techniques that could tear holes in reality if I lose control. Lucy was quiet for a moment, studying his face with those sharp brown eyes that saw too much. What aren't you telling me? Damn. He'd hoped she wouldn't pick up on that. There's a technique, he said finally. Something called the final spiral seal. According to the archives, it's powerful enough to destroy entities like Yamada permanently across all possible dimensions. That sounds perfect. What's the catch? Kazuki closed his eyes, unable to watch her face as he explained. The user's complete existence across all possible realities, not just death, total erasure from the cosmic order. No afterlife, no reincarnation, no possibility of ever existing again in any form. The silence that followed was deafening. No, Lucy said quietly. Absolutely not. Lucy, no. Her voice was fierce now, filled with the kind of determination that had made her a celestial mage despite her family's objections. I won't let you erase yourself from existence. There has to be another way. I've been looking for another way all night. This is it. Then we'll make a new way. Lucy grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to meet her eyes. You're not the same person you were in your previous life, Kazuki. You have different allies, different techniques, different possibilities. Maybe the solution isn't about becoming more powerful. Maybe it's about being smarter. Before he could respond, the apartment door burst open without any warning. Because apparently nobody in this guild understood the concept of privacy, Natsu stood in the doorway, fully dressed and looking uncharacteristically serious. So, you're planning to ditch us and face the snake god alone. How'd I guess? Natsu, this isn't. Yeah, it is. Natsu stepped aside, revealing Gray, Wendy, Urza, and half the guild crowded into his small hallway. We figured you'd try something stupid like this, so we took shifts watching your apartment. You've been spying on me, protecting you from your own martyr complex, Gray corrected. There's a difference. Look, Kazuki said, trying to sound reasonable, I appreciate the concern, but this is my responsibility. Like hell it is, Urza interrupted, pushing past Natsu to enter the apartment. Her expression was the kind reserved for particularly stubborn opponents. Yamada no Orochi isn't just your problem, it's threatening our world, our guild, our family. Which makes it our fight too. But if you leave, you'll face this thing alone and probably die. Makarov's voice cut through the argument as the guild master appeared in the doorway. Is that really what you think Jiraiya would have wanted for you? The invocation of his old teacher's name hit like a physical blow. Kazuki had mentioned Jiraiya during his cover story to the council, but Makarov seemed to understand exactly who that man had been to Naruto. Master, Jiraiya taught you that strength comes from bonds, didn't he? Makarov continued gently. That the most powerful techniques mean nothing if you don't have people to protect. He also taught me that sometimes you have to sacrifice yourself for the greater good. No, Wendy's quiet voice surprised everyone. He taught you that sometimes you have to risk yourself for the greater good. There's a difference. The shy dragon slayer stepped forward, her usual nervousness replaced by surprising determination. You told us about your previous life, how you always carried everyone's burdens alone, how you thought it was your job to protect everyone else. But what if that was the problem? What if the reason you couldn't find a perfect solution was because you were trying to do it by yourself? Wendy, I've been thinking about it all night, she continued. The techniques in the archives weren't designed for one person to use alone. They talk about synchronized practitioners and harmony between multiple chakra users. What if the most powerful techniques require teamwork? Levi appeared behind Makarov, carrying an armload of scrolls and books. She's right, I've been cross-referencing the advanced techniques with historical accounts, and every major victory against interdimensional entities involved multiple practitioners working in perfect coordination. The original Uzumaki clan didn't fight as individuals, she continued, spreading documents across his small table. They fought as a unified force, each person contributing their unique strengths to a collective technique that was stronger than the sum of its parts. Kazuki studied the scrolls, seeing patterns he'd missed during his desperate all-night research. Techniques that required multiple chakra signatures, formations that distributed energy load across several practitioners, sealing methods that could only be completed by teams working in perfect synchronization. But these techniques require people trained in chakra manipulation from childhood, he protested. You've all been practicing for less than a week. Then we'll learn faster, Natsu said firmly. However long it takes, whatever it costs, we'll learn what we need to learn. You could die, Kazuki said bluntly. These advanced techniques can kill practitioners if executed improperly. And if Yamada corrupts them like it did yesterday, then we'll find ways to prevent corruption, Urza said. We'll develop countermeasures, backup plans, redundancies. We'll do whatever it takes to make sure we can fight beside you. Why? The question came out more vulnerable than he'd intended. Why are you all so determined to risk yourselves for this? Because you're our nakama, Lucy said simply. Because we care about you and we care about this world, and we're not going to let either one die without a fight. Because fighting impossible odds is what fairy tale does, Gray added with a slight smile. Because someone has to, and we're the ones here, Wendy said practically. Because you taught us that bonds make us stronger, Makarov said. Now let us prove it. Looking around at their faces determined, scared, but absolutely certain in their commitment, Kazuki felt something shift inside his chest. These people weren't asking him to protect them. They were asking to stand beside him, to face the impossible together instead of watching him face it alone. Maybe Wendy was right. Maybe the problem in his previous life hadn't been insufficient power, but insufficient trust in the people who wanted to help him carry the burden. "All right," he said finally, unpacking his travel bag with hands that shook slightly. "But we do this my way, complete disclosure about every risk, every potential consequence. And if I say retreat, we retreat," Lucy agreed, "together. And if the techniques prove too dangerous, we find safer alternatives," Urza said. "But we don't abandon the mission. And if I start to lose control, we help you find it again," Natsu interrupted with his usual grin. "That's what Nakama do." The crash course in advanced chakra manipulation began immediately. Makarov cleared out the guild hall's main floor, creating a practice space large enough for group formations while warding the area against magical detection. They couldn't afford to have the council or the cult discovering what they were attempting. "The key to advanced techniques," Kazuki explained to the assembled guild members, "is perfect synchronization. Not just of timing, but of intent, emotion, and spiritual energy. You have to trust each other completely, because even a moment's doubt can cause the entire formation to collapse." He demonstrated with a basic multi-person technique, something called spiral wind formation, that required 4 practitioners working in perfect harmony. Lucy, Natsu, Gray, and Wendy took positions at the cardinal points while Kazuki stood in the center, guiding their energy into a coherent pattern. "Feel for my chakra signature," he instructed. "Don't try to match it exactly, blend with it, like instruments in an orchestra finding harmony." The first attempt was a disaster. Gray's energy was too aggressive, Natsu's too chaotic, Lucy's too structured, and Wendy's too gentle. The resulting technique collapsed within seconds, leaving all of them exhausted and slightly singed. "Again," Kazuki said patiently. The second attempt was worse. The third was marginally better. By the 10th try, they were beginning to find a rhythm. "There," Kazuki said as golden energy finally began spiraling between the 4 outer practitioners. "Now hold that resonance and let me add the central component." His chakra joined the formation like the keystone in an arch, binding the separate energies into something unified and powerful. The resulting technique created a tornado of golden wind that could have leveled half the guild hall if he hadn't kept it contained. "Incredible," Levy breathed, taking notes from her observation position. "The energy output is exponentially higher than individual techniques." "That's just a basic formation," Kazuki said, already planning their next lesson. "The advanced techniques require perfect synchronization across dozens of participants." Over the next several hours, he worked with different groups on various formations. Gadgil and Levy learned a defensive technique that could create barriers capable of stopping interdimensional attacks. Kana and Elfman mastered an amplification formation that could boost individual magical abilities beyond normal limits. Even Makarov participated, his vast magical experience making him a natural at the coordination aspects. But it was Team Natsu that proved most adept at the really advanced techniques. Their bond, forged through countless battles and shared dangers, allowed them to synchronize their energies with minimal conscious effort. "Try the spiral dragon formation," Kazuki suggested after they'd mastered several intermediate techniques. This one was significantly more complex, a technique that combined Dragon Slayer magic principles with chakra manipulation to create attacks that could disrupt interdimensional barriers. Natsu and Wendy took the primary positions as actual Dragon Slayers, while Lucy and Gray provided supporting energy streams. The result was spectacular. Flames and wind merged with chakra to create a technique that looked like a living dragon made of pure energy. When it struck the reinforced practice target, the construct didn't just destroy it. It unraveled the magical bonds holding the material together at a fundamental level. That, Urzu observed with satisfaction, could actually hurt something like Yamada. "If we can execute it under combat conditions," Gray pointed out. "It's one thing to synchronize in a controlled environment. It's another thing entirely when you're dodging interdimensional void beams." He was right, but they were learning faster than Kazuki had dared hope. The combination of fairy tales, natural bonds, and their individual magical talents was creating possibilities that hadn't existed in his previous world. "There's one more technique," he said as afternoon faded toward evening. "Something I think we can adapt from the archives, but it requires everyone, the entire guild, working in perfect synchronization." "What kind of technique?" Makarov asked. "The archives call it clan unity formation. A technique where every member of the Uzumaki clan would contribute their energy to a single, overwhelmingly powerful attack. According to the records, it was only used once against something called the Void Shepherd, and it worked. What's the energy requirement? Levy asked practically. Everything. Every member of the guild would need to channel their full magical power into the formation simultaneously, and if the synchronization fails at the critical moment. Kazuki paused. The backlash could kill everyone involved. The silence that followed was heavy with consideration. How powerful are we talking? Natsu asked. Powerful enough to destroy Yamada permanently across all dimensions, Kazuki said. Powerful enough to end this threat forever. And if it doesn't work, then we're all dead and Yamada manifests anyway. More silence. Then Kana spoke up from her position at the bar. So basically we either win completely or lose completely. No middle ground. That's about right, yeah. Sounds like fairy tale odds to me, she said with a grin, raising her drink in a mock toast. I'm in, we're all in, Makarov said firmly. But we'll need time to practice the formation properly. How long do we have? 5 days until Yamada's deadline. But I think we can manage it in. The guild hall doors burst open, interrupting Kazuki mid-sentence. Councilman Org stumbled inside, his usually pristine robes torn and his face pale with exhaustion. Help, he gasped. The council, they're all dead, or worse. He collapsed to his knees, revealing burns across his back that looked sickeningly familiar. Spiral-shaped marks that pulsed with dark energy. What happened? Urza asked, immediately moving to provide medical assistance. The cult. They infiltrated the council headquarters, took control of Protocol 7. Org's voice was weak but urgent. They're not just trying to manifest Yamada anymore. They're using council resources to accelerate the process. How much time do we have left? Kazuki asked with growing dread. The ritual components are already in place. Based on the energy signatures I saw, Org met his eyes with the expression of a man delivering a death sentence. Maybe 18 hours, less if they optimize the process. The guild hall erupted in shocked voices, but Kazuki barely heard them. 18 hours to master techniques that should take months to learn properly. 18 hours to forge perfect unity among dozens of people with different fighting styles and magical disciplines. 18 hours to save the world. Well, he said finally, I guess we're going to find out just how fast Fairy Tail can learn when everything depends on it. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of intensive training that pushed everyone beyond their normal limits. Makarov used his authority as guild master to put the entire building under lockdown, preventing any interruptions while they practiced the clan unity formation. It was brutal work. The technique required not just perfect synchronization of magical energy, but perfect emotional harmony. Every doubt, every fear, every moment of hesitation could cause the formation to collapse catastrophically. Focus on what connects you, Kazuki called out as he guided 30 guild members through their 15th attempt at the formation. Not your individual power, but what you share with each other. Slowly, gradually, they began to find their rhythm. Lucy's celestial magic harmonized with Levy's solid script abilities, creating structures that could channel vast amounts of energy safely. Natsu's fire merged with Gray's ice in ways that should have been impossible, producing techniques that combined destruction and preservation in perfect balance. Most importantly, they were learning to trust each other completely. When Gadgil extended his magical signature toward Wendy's, there was no hesitation, no holding back. When Urza synchronized her energy with Kana's, it was with absolute faith that their guildmate wouldn't let her down. That's it, Kazuki said as the formation finally achieved stable resonance for more than 30 seconds. Hold that feeling, remember exactly how this unity feels, because in the real battle, we'll only get one chance to make it work. But even as they practiced, he could feel Yamada's presence growing stronger. The connection between them was no longer intermittent. It was constant now, a burning awareness at the edge of his consciousness that reminded him exactly how little time they had left. 6 hours, my vessel, the serpent's voice whispered through their bond. 6 hours until I manifest fully and consume this delicious world. I do hope you and your friends are prepared for the honor of being my first meal. The mental contact was stronger than ever, and Kazuki realized with growing alarm that he could feel Yamada's influence trying to seep into the guild formation. The serpent wasn't just counting down the time, it was actively trying to corrupt their technique from within. Everyone break formation, he said urgently. Now, the guild members scattered just as dark energy erupted from the center of their practice circle. The spot where Kazuki had been standing was now marked with spiral burns that looked exactly like the ones on Org's back. What happened? Lucy asked with concern. Yamada is trying to sabotage our training through our connection. It can't directly control the formation, but it can disrupt it at critical moments. Kazuki rubbed his temples, trying to ward off the headache that always came with direct mental contact. We're going to need a way to shield the technique from its influence. How? Wendy asked. I don't know. The archives don't mention anything about protecting group techniques from corruption by the target itself. He looked around at their worried faces, seeing the same realization dawning that had struck him. We might be walking into an impossible situation. Then we make it possible, Urza said firmly. What would prevent Yamada from influencing the formation? Physical distance, maybe. If I stayed away from the center of the technique. No, Natsu interrupted. You're the keystone. The formation doesn't work without you. Emotional barriers, Lucy suggested. If we could create some kind of mental shield against a cosmic entity that's had centuries to study interdimensional manipulation, Gray shook his head. That's not going to work. They were running out of options and time when Levy spoke up from her research station. What about using its own power against it? Meaning what? Kazuki asked. Yamada is trying to corrupt your connection to the formation, right? But corruption requires a pathway, some kind of spiritual or magical link it can exploit. Levy's eyes were bright with the excitement of solving a complex puzzle. What if we gave it a false pathway? Something that looks like the real formation but is actually a trap. The idea was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. You're talking about creating a decoy technique that we deliberately let Yamada corrupt while hiding the real formation underneath. Exactly. Let it think it's sabotaging our attack while we prepare the genuine technique without its knowledge. That's incredibly dangerous, Urza pointed out. If Yamada realizes what we're doing, then we're no worse off than we are now, Makarov said with grim pragmatism. But if it works, we'll have our one chance at a clean attack. Kazuki considered the plan, weighing risks against potential benefits. It would require splitting their forces, using some guild members to maintain the decoy while others prepared the real formation. And if the timing was off by even a few seconds, both techniques would fail and leave them defenseless, but it was the best option they had. All right, he said, we'll try it, but I want everyone to understand this is our last chance. If this doesn't work, there's no backup plan. We succeed or we die trying. Wouldn't have it any other way, Kana said with a grin that didn't quite hide her nervousness. As they began preparing for the most dangerous technique any of them had ever attempted, none of them noticed the small spiral symbols that had been carved into the guild hall's walls during their practice sessions. The marks pulsed once with dark red light, creating anchor points that would make Yamada's final manifestation even faster and more powerful than originally planned. 4 hours until the ritual reached completion. 4 hours to perfect a technique that could save the world or destroy it trying. In the space between dimensions, Yamato no Orochi coiled around itself with anticipation, already savoring the magical energy it would soon consume. The endgame had begun. With 3 hours remaining until Yamada's deadline, Kazuki found himself alone with Lucy on the guild hall's roof, taking a brief break from the intensive training. The night air was cool against his skin, but he could feel an unnatural warmth rising from the direction of the forest where yesterday's manifestation had occurred. The anchor points are activating, he said quietly. Yamada is beginning the final phase. Lucy moved closer, close enough that he could smell her shampoo and feel the warmth of her presence. Are you scared? Terrified, he admitted. Not of dying, I've made peace with that possibility. But of failing everyone again. Again, in my previous life, I couldn't save everyone. There were always casualties, always people who died because I wasn't strong enough or smart enough or fast enough. Kazuki's voice was barely above a whisper. What if history repeats itself? What if I lead all of you into a battle we can't win? Lucy was quiet for a moment, then took his hand in hers. Do you want to know what I think? Yeah. I think Naruto Uzumaki was an incredible person who did impossible things to protect the people he cared about. But he was just one person, carrying burdens that should have been shared. She squeezed his hand gently. You're not alone this time, Kazuki. You have all of us. And if we all die because I made the wrong choice, then we'll die together, fighting for something that matters. That's better than living in a world where we were too afraid to try. The simple certainty in her voice was both comforting and heartbreaking. These people trusted him completely, even knowing that their faith might get them all killed. Lucy, yeah, when this is over, assuming we survive, would you like to go on that date we talked about? Somewhere nice, where we don't have to worry about interdimensional serpent gods or ancient sealing techniques. Her smile was radiant even in the darkness. I'd love that, but Kazuki, yeah, in any world, any life, I want you by my side. Whether that's as your teammate, your partner, or something more, I'm not going anywhere. The words hit him like a physical blow, beautiful and terrible at the same time. In his previous life, he'd never found someone who understood him so completely, who saw all his flaws and chose to stand beside him anyway. "I love you," he said, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. "I know this is terrible timing, and I know I might not survive the next few hours, but I needed you to know. In case." Lucy silenced him with a kiss that tasted like hope and determination and the promise of a future they might never get to see. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We're going to make it," she said fiercely. "Both of us, all of us, because I refuse to accept a world where this is the end of our story." Before Kazuki could respond, the night sky above Magnolia began to tear like fabric. Cracks of absolute darkness spread across the heavens, revealing glimpses of a realm filled with scales and burning eyes. The final manifestation had begun ahead of schedule. "Everyone inside," Kazuki shouted, his voice carrying across the rooftops. "Positions for the clan unity formation, this is it." As they ran toward the guild hall, Lucy's hand still clasped in his, Kazuki felt a strange sense of completeness. Whatever happened in the next few hours, he wouldn't face it alone. This time, he had a family to fight beside. This time, the ending would be different. It had to be. The sky above Magnolia split open like a wound in reality itself. What started as hairline cracks quickly widened into gaping tears that revealed glimpses of something vast and terrible beyond. The dimensional barrier that separated worlds was finally giving way under the pressure of Yamada no Orochi's accumulated power. "Positions," Kazuki shouted as the guild members rushed into the main hall. "Decoy formation first, make it look convincing." 15 guild members took their places in the false formation, while the others prepared the real clan unity technique in concealment. It had to look perfect from Yamada's perspective, a genuine attempt at the most powerful technique they could manage. Above them, something enormous pressed against the dimensional tiers, slowly forcing its way through. A massive serpent's head emerged first, easily the size of Cathedral, covered in scales that reflected light from stars that had never existed. Its eyes burned with the accumulated malice of civilizations it had devoured across countless dimensions. Finally, Yamada no Orochi's voice shook the very foundations of reality as more of its massive form squeezed through the tiers. "This dimension smells delicious. So much magical energy just waiting to be consumed." The serpent's body kept coming, hundreds of feet of otherworldly muscle and scale, coiling around itself as it established a physical presence in their reality. When it was fully manifested, Yamada no Orochi stretched from one end of Magnolia to the other, its head towering above the tallest buildings like a mountain come to life. "Sweet Mavis," Kana whispered from her position in the decoy formation. "How are we supposed to fight something that big?" "Together," Kazuki replied, his voice carrying to every member of the guild through chakra-enhanced speech. "Remember, we're not trying to outmuscle it, we're trying to outsmart it." Yamada's massive head turned toward the guild hall, focusing on the building with predatory interest. "My vessel, I can sense your pathetic attempt at resistance. Please show me this clan unity formation you've been practicing. I'm curious to see how my corruption has improved it." The serpent's confidence was terrifying, but also reassuring in a twisted way. It really did think it had successfully sabotaged their technique, which meant the real formation remained hidden. "Now," Kazuki called out. The decoy formation activated with a brilliant display of golden energy that spiraled up toward the dimensional tiers. It looked perfect, every bit as powerful and coordinated as the genuine technique would have been. Yamada watched with amusement as the energy built toward its crescendo. "Impressive light show. But observe how easily I can." The serpent's influence slammed into the formation like a tidal wave of malevolent will, corrupting the technique from within just as they'd predicted. The golden energy turned sickly purple, the spiral patterns reversed their rotation, and the entire formation began collapsing back on itself. "Now," Kazuki shouted to the concealed group, "real formation. Everything we've got." The genuine clan unity formation erupted from concealment with power that dwarfed anything they'd achieved in practice. Every guild member contributed their full magical strength to the technique, while Kazuki coordinated the energy flow with tactical precision that would have made his old senseis proud. But this wasn't just military coordination, it was fairy tale at its finest. Natsu's wild enthusiasm merged perfectly with Gray's cool precision. Lucy's careful planning harmonized with Levy's intellectual curiosity. Urza's disciplined strength blended seamlessly with Wendy's gentle compassion. The result was a technique that looked like a star being born. Golden energy spiraled upward in patterns so complex they hurt to look at directly, carrying with it the combined will of everyone Kazuki had come to love. Impossible, Yamada's voice cracked with genuine surprise as the attack struck its massive form. How did you? The technique connected with devastating effect. Scales the size of shields cracked and fell away, otherworldly blood that burned like acid spattered across Magnolia's rooftops, and for the first time since its manifestation, the serpent's confident demeanor wavered. "We did it," Natsu whooped with joy. "We actually hurt the thing." But Kazuki's enhanced senses were already detecting the problem. The wound was healing, new scales growing to replace the damaged ones, and Yamada's magical pressure was actually increasing rather than decreasing. "It's absorbing the energy from our attack," he realized with growing horror. "The technique hurt it, but it's converting the damage into fuel for its own power." "Clever," Yamada said with approval, its wound already half-healed. "A false formation to hide the real one. I admit, I did not expect such tactical sophistication from insects, but ultimately, it changes nothing." The serpent's head reared back, jaws opening to reveal something far worse than teeth. The void pure nothingness that ate light and hope and existence itself began building between its fangs. "Observe the fate of those who oppose me." The void beam lanced out toward the guild hall, promising complete erasure for everyone in its path. But instead of scattering in panic, the guild members moved with perfect coordination. "Ice wall formation," Gray shouted, creating barriers of frozen magical energy that redirected the beam skyward. "Lightning redirect," Urza added, her swords conducting the residual void energy safely into the ground. "Wind dispersal," Wendy called out, creating air currents that prevented void contamination from spreading to the surrounding city. They moved like a single organism, each person's abilities covering for the other's weaknesses. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, the perfect fusion of individual strength and collective will. "Nice teamwork," Kazuki called out with genuine pride. "Now let's see what else we've learned." What followed was unlike any battle in recorded magical history. Yamata no Orochi wasn't just fighting a guild, it was fighting an army that moved with the precision of a military unit and the heart of a family. Gadgil and Levi combined their abilities to create weapons that could actually pierce interdimensional scales. Kana used her card magic to predict Yamada's attacks and coordinate perfect defensive responses. Elfman and Murajane worked together to create distractions that kept the serpent from focusing its full attention on any single target. But it was Team Natsu that truly shone. The hybrid techniques they'd mastered over the past week proved devastatingly effective against an enemy that had never encountered chakra-enhanced magic before. "Spiral Dragon Formation," Natsu roared, flames merging with Kazuki's chakra to create attacks that could burn through dimensional barriers. "Celestial Chakra Barrage," Lucy added, her spirits empowered by energy that existed outside normal magical categories. "Ice Mirror Technique," Gray called out, creating barriers that could reflect Yamata's void attacks back at itself. "Sky Dragon Sage Mode," Wendy shouted, using techniques that combined Dragon Slayer magic with rudimentary sage abilities. For nearly an hour, they held their own against a cosmic horror that had devoured entire dimensions. Every guild member rose to the occasion, pushing their abilities beyond normal limits and discovering reserves of strength they'd never known they possessed. But slowly, inevitably, the tide began to turn. "It's learning," Yamada observed with growing amusement as it adapted to their hybrid techniques. "Your CHAH Kara system is fascinating, little vessel. I look forward to studying it more closely once I've consumed your essence." The serpent's attacks were becoming more sophisticated, more targeted. Instead of trying to overwhelm them with raw power, it began exploiting weaknesses in their formations and countering specific techniques with disturbing precision. "It's analyzing our fighting patterns," Kazuki realized. "Every technique we use teaches it how to counter us more effectively." "Then we get creative," Urza replied, requipping into armor Kazuki had never seen before something that looked like it was made from crystallized starlight. Fairy Tail's specialty. What followed was organized chaos at its finest. Instead of sticking to practiced formations, the guild began improvising with reckless creativity that kept Yamata guessing. Techniques that shouldn't have worked were combined in ways that defied magical theory. Coordination gave way to inspired improvisation that was somehow even more effective, but it still wasn't enough. "I'm growing bored," Yamada announced after deflecting another brilliant combination attack. "Time to end this farce." The serpent's massive form began to glow with dark energy that made reality itself seem fragile. Instead of focusing on the guild, it started drawing power directly from the magical energy that permeated Fior itself. "It's draining the entire country," Levy gasped, her calculations showing the scope of what was happening. "Every mage, every magical creature, every enchanted item, it's consuming all of it." Across Fior, mages collapsed as their magical energy was forcibly extracted. Magical creatures fell from the sky as their life force was drained away. Even the land itself began to wither as Yamada consumed the fundamental forces that sustained the kingdom's ecosystem. "We have to stop it," Lucy shouted, but her celestial spirits were already flickering as their connection to the celestial world was disrupted by the energy drain. "How?" Yamada laughed, its voice echoing across dimensions. "You are insects trying to comprehend the power of a god. Soon, I will have consumed enough energy to manifest in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Your pathetic world will be merely the first of many." Kazuki felt the spiral mark on his palm burning as the serpent's influence grew stronger. Through their connection, he could sense the scope of Yamada's plan, not just to devour this world, but to use it as a launching point for simultaneous attacks on dozens of other dimensions. If they failed here, the consequences would ripple across the entire multiverse. "There's only one option left," he said quietly, though his voice somehow carried to every guild member despite the chaos around them. "Kazuki, no," Lucy said immediately, recognizing the tone in his voice. "Whatever you're thinking, Sage Mode," he said simply. "The complete version, not the partial manifestation. I've been using full synchronization with the natural energy of this dimension." The technique he was describing would give him power comparable to what he'd possessed in his previous life. But in this world, with Yamada's influence already corrupting the natural energy flows, the risks were enormous. "The feedback could kill you," Urza pointed out. "Or it could give Yamada direct access to your consciousness," Wendy added with concern. "Or it could tear holes in dimensional space," Gray concluded grimly. "Maybe," Kazuki agreed, "but if I don't try it, everyone dies anyway. And if I can achieve perfect Sage Mode, I'll have access to techniques that could actually threaten something like Yamada." "What do you need from us?" Natsu asked simply. The question caught Kazuki off guard. No debate about the risks, no attempts to talk him out of it, just immediate acceptance and offers of support. "Time," he said, "and protection while I synchronize with the natural energy. The process will leave me completely vulnerable for several minutes." "You've got it," Makarov said firmly. "Every one of us will die before we let anything reach you during the transformation." Looking around at their faces scared but determined, trusting him completely despite the enormous risks, Kazuki felt the same shift in his chest that had been happening repeatedly over the past week. These people weren't just his teammates or even his friends. They were his family in every way that mattered. "Thank you," he said simply. Then he sat down in the center of the guild hall, closed his eyes, and began the most dangerous technique he'd ever attempted. "Perfect Sage Mode," he whispered, opening himself completely to the natural energy that flowed through this dimension. The world exploded into sensation as power beyond anything he'd ever imagined flooded through his consciousness. But instead of the clean, controlled energy he remembered from Mount Myoboku, this world's natural energy was tainted, infected by Yamada's influence, and twisted by the serpent's cosmic malevolence. Finally, Yamada's voice echoed directly in his mind, stronger than ever before. "You've opened yourself to me completely. Now, let me show you what happens to vessels who resist too long." The serpent's consciousness slammed into Kazuki's mind like a tidal wave of hatred and hunger. For a terrifying moment, he felt his own identity being subsumed by something vast and ancient and absolutely evil. But then he felt them, the bonds that connected him to his guild, to his family, to everyone he'd learned to love in this world. Lucy's fierce determination, Natsu's unshakable optimism, Gray's steady reliability, Wendy's gentle strength, Urza's protective instincts, Makarov's paternal wisdom. The connections blazed like stars in the darkness of Yamada's influence, reminding him exactly who he was and what he was fighting for. "Impossible," the serpent snarled as Kazuki's consciousness fought back against the invasion. "How are you resisting me?" "Because I'm not alone," Kazuki replied, his voice echoing across dimensions, "and I never have to be alone again." The transformation completed with a flash of golden light that could be seen from space. When it faded, Kazuki opened eyes that now held the wisdom of the natural world itself, power flowing through his body in patterns that made reality bend around him. Perfect Sage Mode. The ultimate harmony between human will and natural energy, achieved despite Yamada's attempts at corruption. Now we'll see, Yamada said, rearing back for an attack that would level half of Magnolia, whether your enlightenment can match my hunger. But as the serpent's jaws opened to unleash destruction, it suddenly found itself unable to move. Golden chains of pure sage energy had wrapped around its massive form, holding it in place with the combined will of an entire dimension. Actually, Kazuki said, rising to his feet with power radiating from every cell of his body, let's see whether your hunger can match our bonds. The final battle was about to begin. Perfect Sage Mode transformed Kazuki into something that existed at the intersection of human and divine. Golden energy flowed around him like liquid starlight. His eyes held depths that reflected the wisdom of entire ecosystems, and when he moved, reality itself bent to accommodate his will. The chains holding Yamata no Orochi weren't just chakra constructs. They were manifestations of the natural world's collective desire to survive, given form through Kazuki's perfect harmony with the dimensional energy flows. Impressive, the serpent admitted, testing the strength of its bonds. But chains are meant to be broken. Dark energy erupted from Yamada's massive form as it began systematically overwhelming each restraint. The golden chains held for now, but cracks were already appearing in the sage energy constructs. Everyone, Kazuki called out, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated with their souls. I need you to channel everything you have into me, not just your magic, your emotions, your memories, your bonds with each other. What are you planning? Lucy asked, though she was already extending her magical energy toward him. Something that shouldn't be possible, he replied honestly. I'm going to attempt the final spiral seal, but modified. Instead of using just my existence as fuel, I'm going to use our connections, all of our connections, as the foundation. That's insane, Gray said, even as his ice magic began flowing toward Kazuki's position. The energy requirements alone will kill us all if we're not perfectly synchronized, Kazuki finished. But if we can achieve true unity, not just magical harmony, but emotional and spiritual unity, we might be able to generate enough power to seal Yamada permanently without anyone having to be erased from existence. Urza was already moving, her armor glowing as she added her strength to the growing energy matrix. What do we need to do? Remember why you fight, Kazuki said, sage energy beginning to spiral around the entire guild hall. Remember what connects you to each other, what makes Fairy Tail more than just a collection of individual mages. One by one, the guild members opened their hearts completely. Not just their magical power, but their deepest emotions, their strongest bonds, their absolute faith in each other, and in the family they'd built together. Lucy channeled her love for the guild that had given her a home when her own family had failed her. Natsu poured in his determination to protect the people who'd accepted him despite the dragon he carried within. Gray added his gratitude for friends who'd helped him find purpose beyond revenge. Wendy contributed her joy at discovering she was never truly alone in the world. The energy matrix grew brighter and more complex with each addition. Gadgel's rough affection, Levy's intellectual passion, Kana's drunken loyalty, Elfman's protective instincts, Murajane's nurturing warmth, Juvia's overwhelming love, even Laxus's grudging respect. All of it flowed into Kazuki's sage-enhanced consciousness and began fusing into something unprecedented. What are you doing? Yamada demanded, its struggles against the golden chains becoming more frantic as it sensed the building power. That level of unified consciousness is impossible for separate beings. Maybe for normal beings, Makarov said with pride, adding his own vast magical reserves to the matrix. But we're Fairy Tail. The old guild master's energy carried decades of paternal love, protective instincts that had guided hundreds of young mages, and wisdom earned through countless battles. When it merged with the growing matrix, something clicked into place that made the entire structure exponentially more stable. Family, Kazuki whispered, understanding flooding through his sage-enhanced perception. That's what makes this possible. We're not separate individuals sharing power, we're family sharing strength. The distinction was crucial. Individual mages could combine their magic through formations and coordination, but true family could share their very essence without losing what made them unique. Each person's energy remained distinctly their own while becoming part of something infinitely greater. Yamata no Orochi sensed the shift and began thrashing with desperate fury. I will not be denied. I have devoured civilizations. I am hunger itself. The serpent's massive form began glowing with power drawn from every dimension it had ever touched. This wasn't just Yamada's natural abilities. It was channeling the accumulated magical energy of entire worlds, civilizations that had fallen to its appetite over eons of existence. The golden chains shattered like glass. Finally free, Yamada snarled, rearing back to unleash an attack that would sterilize the continent. Now you will learn why I am feared across all realities. But Kazuki was ready. The final spiral seal had been building throughout their entire conversation, powered not by his individual existence, but by the collective will of everyone he'd come to love. When he released it, the technique didn't look like the violent, destructive sealing methods from his previous life. Instead, it looked like hope given form. Golden spirals erupted from the guild hall and spread across the entire kingdom, each one carrying the essence of fairy tale's bonds. Not conquest or domination, but acceptance. Not destruction, but transformation. Not erasure, but integration into something better. Impossible, Yamada gasped as the spirals wrapped around its massive form. But these weren't restraints, they were invitations. What is this feeling? For the first time in eons, the cosmic serpent was experiencing something other than hunger. Through Kazuki's modified seal, it was feeling what the guild members felt for each other: unconditional acceptance, protective instincts, the joy of belonging to something larger than oneself. This is what you've been trying to devour all along, Kazuki said, his voice carrying across dimensions. Not just magical energy connection, love, family, but you can't consume bonds like that. You can only become part of them. The technique wasn't trying to destroy Yamata no Orochi. It was offering the ancient entity something it had never experienced, a chance to belong instead of simply consuming. I don't understand, the serpent whispered, its voice losing the crushing weight of cosmic malevolence. For so long, there was only hunger, only the need to consume and grow stronger. Because you were alone, Wendy said softly, her healing magic adding gentleness to the sealing spiral. But you don't have to be alone anymore. They would, accept something like me. Yamada's massive head turned toward the guild members with something approaching wonder. After everything I have done, everyone deserves a chance to be better, Natsu said firmly. That's what fairy tale believes. The transformation that followed was unlike anything in recorded magical history. Instead of being destroyed or banished, Yamata no Orochi began to change. Its massive physical form dissolved into pure energy that flowed into the dimensional matrix created by the guild's bonds. The cosmic serpent wasn't being eliminated. It was being integrated into a family structure vast enough to contain its immense power while gentle enough to heal its ancient loneliness. But the process required everything they had. Every ounce of magical energy, every scrap of emotional strength, every bond that connected them to each other and to their guild. Kazuki felt himself at the center of it all, serving as the focal point for forces that should have torn him apart instantly. It's too much, Lucy gasped, her celestial magic flickering as the energy demands pushed her beyond her limits. I can't maintain the connection. Yes, you can, Kazuki said, his sage-enhanced perception allowing him to redistribute the energy load more evenly. Trust in the bonds. Trust in each other. One by one, guild members began collapsing as their magical reserves were completely drained. Gray fell to his knees, ice magic exhausted. Wendy swayed dangerously, her healing abilities pushed far beyond safe limits. Even Urza's incredible stamina was reaching its breaking point, but none of them let go. Even as their individual magic failed, their emotional connections remained strong, continuing to feed power into the sealing matrix through sheer force of will. Together, Makarov whispered, the guild master's own vast reserves finally running dry. Whatever happens, we face it together. The old man collapsed, his paternal love the last thing to flow into the technique before his consciousness faded. Master, several voices called out, but there was no energy left for anyone to move. Kazuki felt the weight of the entire technique settling on his shoulders as his guildmates reached their limits. The final spiral seal was still building toward completion, but it needed more power than any individual could provide, even one in perfect sage mode. The choice crystallized with terrible clarity. He could complete the technique using his own life force as fuel, ensuring Yamada's integration, but erasing himself from existence. Or he could let the seal fail, leaving everyone defenseless against a cosmic entity that might revert to its destructive nature. I'm sorry, he whispered, making the same choice he'd made in his previous life. But I won't let any of you die because I wasn't strong enough. Kazuki began channeling his own existence into the sealing matrix, feeling his very essence being consumed by the technique's impossible energy requirements. Memories began fading, first from his original life as Naruto, then from his time as Kazuki. He was disappearing, layer by layer, until only the core of who he was remained. No, Lucy's voice cut through the fading haze of his consciousness. Not again, not like this. Through vision that was already growing dim, he saw her struggling to her feet despite her magical exhaustion. Then Gray, forcing himself upright through sheer stubbornness. Then Natsu, flames flickering weakly around his fists. One by one, every guild member who was still conscious began standing again. "We said together," Urza declared, her armor cracked and her magic spent but her will unbreakable. "That includes you, Kazuki." They couldn't provide more magical energy, they'd already given everything they had. But they could provide something even more powerful, absolute, unwavering faith. "Don't you dare sacrifice yourself again," Natsu said with a grin that was equal parts exhaustion and determination. "We've got too much planned for after this fight." "Like that date you promised me," Lucy added, extending her hand toward him even though she could barely stand. "I refuse to let you disappear before you take me somewhere nice." Their belief in him, their absolute refusal to accept his sacrifice, began feeding new power into the technique. Not magical energy, but something far more fundamental, the bonds that connected them across space and time and even death itself. "You're not alone," Wendy said softly. "You never have to be alone again." The final spiral seal completed with a flash of light that could be seen from orbit. When it faded, Yamada no Orochi was gone, not destroyed, not banished, but transformed into something entirely new. The Cosmic Serpent's vast consciousness had been integrated into the guild's family bonds, its hunger replaced by belonging, its malevolence healed by unconditional acceptance. Kazuki collapsed to his knees, still alive but fundamentally changed. The perfect sage mode was gone, his chakra reserves were nearly empty, and he could feel that most of his ninja abilities had been permanently sacrificed to fuel the technique. But he was alive, they were all alive, and the threat that had consumed entire dimensions was finally at peace. "Did we win?" Gray asked weakly from his position sprawled on the guild hall floor. "Yeah," Kazuki replied, looking around at the exhausted but smiling faces of his family. "We won." In the distance, the dimensional tears in the sky were healing themselves, reality knitting back together as the crisis passed. Across Fior, mages who had collapsed when Yamada drained their energy were beginning to wake up, their magic slowly returning as the natural order reasserted itself. The war was over. The world was safe. And for the first time since his reincarnation, Kazuki knew with absolute certainty where he belonged. "So," Lucy said, managing a weak smile as she helped him to his feet, "about that date." Despite everything, the exhaustion, the lingering danger, the fact that half the guild was unconscious on the floor, Kazuki found himself laughing. Real laughter, bright and genuine and full of hope for a future that no longer hung under the shadow of ancient threats. "Give me a week to recover," he said, "and I'll take you anywhere you want to go." "I'll hold you to that," she replied, leaning against him as they both struggled to stay upright. Around them, the guild hall was filled with the quiet sounds of family coming back together after facing the impossible. Quiet conversations, gentle healing magic, the simple pleasure of being alive and together and safe. Fairy Tail had faced the end of the world and emerged victorious. Not through overwhelming power or clever tactics, but through the bonds that made them stronger together than they could ever be apart. The Spiral Sage's journey was complete. The vessel had found his family, and the hungry god had learned what it meant to belong. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new opportunities to protect the world they'd fought so hard to save. But tonight, they were just family, grateful to be together and ready to face whatever came next. Together. 3 days later, Kazuki woke to the sound of Lucy humming softly beside his bed, her voice carrying a melody he didn't recognize, but that somehow felt like coming home. Sunlight was streaming through the infirmary windows, and for a blessed moment, he couldn't remember why he was lying in the guild's medical ward with every muscle in his body feeling like it had been put through a meat grinder. Then the memories came flooding back Yamada no Orochi, the final spiral seal, the sensation of his very existence being consumed by a technique that should have killed him. He sat up with a gasp, instinctively reaching for chakra that wasn't there. "Easy," Lucy said gently, her hand settling on his shoulder. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. Wendy says your magical pathways were completely overloaded." Kazuki took inventory of his condition with the methodical precision that had kept him alive through 2 lifetimes of combat. His physical body seemed intact, if exhausted. His magical core was still there, but severely reduced from what it had been. And his chakra system, most of it's gone, he said quietly, not sure if he was relieved or devastated. "I can feel the pathways, but they're barely functional, maybe enough for basic techniques, but nothing like what I could do before." "Are you okay with that?" Lucy asked, her voice carefully neutral. Kazuki considered the question seriously. In his previous life, losing his ninja abilities would have been devastating. They'd been his identity, his purpose, his primary way of protecting the people he cared about. But now, yeah, he said, surprised by how much he meant it. I think I gained something better than power. What's that? A real family. He squeezed her hand, marveling at how right the simple contact felt. People who were willing to stand beside me instead of behind me. People who refused to let me sacrifice myself even when it would have been easier for everyone. Lucy's smile was radiant. Good answer, because Natsu's been driving everyone crazy asking when you'd wake up so he could challenge you to a proper fight. Apparently, cosmic world-saving techniques don't count for his personal win-loss record. Despite everything, Kazuki found himself laughing. Of course they don't, that would be too logical for Natsu. Speaking of which, Lucy continued, Master wants to see you when you're feeling up to it. Something about official guild business that apparently can't wait. Official business. You saved the world, Kazuki. Did you think there wouldn't be paperwork? The guild hall had been completely repaired while he'd been unconscious, with no visible sign of the dimensional tears or serpent battles that had nearly destroyed it just days before. But something felt different about the space lighter somehow, as if the very air was easier to breathe. Ah, our hero awakens. Makarov called out from his position behind the bar, where he was sharing drinks with several people Kazuki didn't recognize. Come, there are some people who'd like to meet you. The strangers turned out to be representatives from the Magic Council, other guild masters from across Fior, and even a few delegates from neighboring kingdoms. All of them wanted to thank him personally for averting what their magical censors had classified as a Class X extinction event. The energy readings we detected during the final battle, one council member explained, suggested magical forces that could have destabilized the entire continent. Whatever technique you used literally saved millions of lives. It wasn't just me, Kazuki said firmly. The entire guild contributed to that technique. I was just the focal point. Modest as well as powerful, one of the visiting guild masters observed with approval. Fairy Tail chose their newest S-Class mage well. S-Class? Kazuki looked at Makarov in surprise. Did I forget to mention that? The guild master said with poorly concealed glee. The council has officially recognized your actions during the crisis. Congratulations, you're now one of Fairy Tail's S-Class mages. The announcement was met with cheers from the assembled guild members, though Kazuki noticed that none of them seemed particularly surprised. They'd probably known about this before he'd even woken up. With great power comes great paperwork, Urza said solemnly, appearing at his elbow with a stack of official documents. These need your signature for the formal recognition ceremony next week. Ceremony? The king wants to give you a medal, Lucy explained with barely contained amusement. Apparently, saving the kingdom from interdimensional threats warrants official recognition. Do I have to make a speech? Probably, Gray said unhelpfully. The thought of standing in front of royal officials and explaining his role in recent events was terrifying in ways that fighting cosmic serpents hadn't been. But before he could panic properly, Wendy appeared with a cup of tea and her usual gentle smile. Don't worry, she said. We'll all be there with you. That's what family does. The formal ceremony was every bit as awkward as Kazuki had feared, but also more meaningful than he'd expected. Standing in the royal palace, wearing dress robes that Urza had forcibly helped him select, listening to King Toma praise his selfless heroism and dedication to protecting the innocent, he found himself thinking about how surreal his life had become. A year ago, he'd been a confused young man with fragments of strange dreams and magic that didn't work like anyone else's. Now he was apparently a national hero with an official commendation from the crown and responsibilities he'd never asked for. But when he looked out at the assembled crowd and saw his guildmates cheering enthusiastically from the front row, when he caught Lucy's proud smile and Natsu's enthusiastic thumbs up and Gray's approving nod, the surreal became simply. Right, this was where he belonged. Not because of his power or his previous life or his connection to ancient threats, but because these people had chosen to accept him completely, flaws, mysteries, and all. Thank you, Your Majesty, he said when the king finished his formal speech. But I want to be clear, everything I accomplished was only possible because of the family that stood beside me. Fairy Tail doesn't create heroes. It creates bonds that make ordinary people capable of extraordinary things. The king seemed pleased with the response, and the assembled nobles applauded politely. But Kazuki was only paying attention to one person in the audience, Lucy, whose expression suggested she was already planning to tease him about his inspiring speechmaking for weeks to come. After the ceremony, there was a formal reception with enough fancy food and political small talk to last several lifetimes. Kazuki endured it with the patience his ninja training had taught him, but he was relieved when Urza finally gave him permission to escape to the palace gardens for some fresh air. He found a quiet bench overlooking the royal gardens and settled down to process everything that had happened. The recognition was nice, but honestly, all he wanted was to go home to the guild hall and resume the normal, chaotic routine of being a fairy tale mage. Hiding from your own celebration, Urza's voice made him look up as she approached in her own formal dress, something elegant and practical that somehow made her look both beautiful and intimidating. "Just thinking," he replied. "A lot has changed in a very short time." "Indeed." Urza settled beside him on the bench, her expression thoughtful. "A month ago, you were a talented but uncertain mage struggling with fragmented memories. Today, you're one of Fairy Tale's S-class mages with the official gratitude of 3 kingdoms. Do you think I'm ready for that kind of responsibility?" "I think," Urza said carefully, "that you've found your path. Not the path of the ninja you used to be, or the confused young man you were when you arrived in Magnolia. Your own path, built on the bonds you've chosen to forge. And if I make mistakes, if I'm not strong enough for the next crisis, then you'll face those challenges the same way you faced this one with family beside you, supporting each other through whatever comes." Urza's smile was warm with genuine affection. "That's what Nakama means, Kazuki. Not perfection, but the commitment to never face darkness alone." Before he could respond, Lucy appeared in the garden entrance, still wearing her formal gown but with her hair slightly mussed and her shoes in her hand. "There you are," she said with relief. "I've been looking everywhere. Are you ready to go home?" "More than ready," Kazuki replied, standing and offering her his arm. "Though I thought the reception was supposed to last another few hours." "It is." But Natsu started a food fight with some visiting dignitaries. Gray somehow lost his shirt during a formal dance, and Kana challenged the Minister of Magic to a drinking contest. Lucy's grin was equal parts exasperation and fondness. "Master decided it was time for a strategic retreat before we caused an international incident." "Some things never change," Urza observed with amusement. "Thank goodness for that," Kazuki said sincerely. The train ride back to Magnolia was filled with the comfortable chaos that had become his new normal. Natsu and Gray were arguing about whose fault the food fight had been, while Happy provided unhelpful commentary. Wendy was trying to heal the bruises Kana had acquired during her drinking contest, while Carla lectured everyone about appropriate behavior at formal events. Levi was already writing up the evening's events for her personal journal, and Urza was cleaning her sword with the methodical precision of someone working off formal dress stress. And Lucy was curled up beside him, her head on his shoulder, as she dozed against the train window. The simple contact filled him with a contentment he'd never experienced in either of his lives. "Hey, Kazuki," Natsu said suddenly, abandoning his argument with Gray. "Now that you're all officially S-class and stuff, does that mean you'll take harder missions?" "Probably," Kazuki replied. "Why? Can we come with you?" "The whole team? Of course. Did you think becoming S-class would change anything between us?" "Nah," Natsu grinned, "but I wanted to make sure. We're a team, right? That doesn't change just because one of us gets fancy titles." "Never," Kazuki said firmly. "Whatever missions I take, whatever challenges we face them together." "Good," Gray said with satisfaction. "Because honestly, you'd probably get yourself killed without us watching your back," says the guy who somehow loses his clothes during formal state dinners. That was an accident. As his friends dissolved into familiar banter, Kazuki found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. From Naruto Uzumaki's sacrificial death to Kazuki's confused awakening. From discovering ancient threats to finding a family worth fighting for, it had been a path full of pain and uncertainty. But it had led him exactly where he belonged. "What are you thinking about?" Lucy asked softly, apparently not as asleep as she'd appeared. "How strange life is," he replied quietly. "In my previous life, I spent decades trying to become strong enough to protect everyone I cared about. But I was always fighting alone, even when I was surrounded by allies. And now I realize that the strongest thing you can do is let people stand beside you instead of always trying to stand in front of them." He tightened his arm around her gently. "It took dying and being reborn in another dimension to figure out what family really means. Better late than never," she said with a smile in her voice. "Much better." 1 year later, the key to any successful mission, Kazuki explained to the group of new guild recruits following him through the forest outside Magnolia, isn't individual strength or powerful magic. It's communication, coordination, and trust in your teammates. The job was simple enough: investigate reports of unusual magical activity near the old cathedral where he'd first faced the spiral cult. Probably just residual energy from the dimensional disturbances, but the Magic Council wanted it checked out by someone with experience in unconventional magical phenomena. Which, apparently, was what they were calling his specialty these days. But Master Kazuki, one of the recruits, said a young woman named Rika who specialized in plant magic, "What if the enemy is too strong for teamwork to matter? Then you find a way to make teamwork stronger," he replied, automatically checking their formation as they moved through the trees. "There's no such thing as an unbeatable enemy, only challenges that require more creativity and cooperation than you've managed so far." "Is that how you beat the Serpent God?" another recruit asked. This one was a teenage boy named Hiro, whose lightning magic reminded Kazuki a bit of Laxus, if Laxus had been about half as arrogant and twice as enthusiastic. "We beat Yamada by refusing to let anyone face it alone," Kazuki said simply. "Every member of the guild contributed something essential to the final technique. Individual power doesn't matter if you don't have people you're fighting for." "And people fighting with you," added a familiar voice from the trees above. Lucy dropped down from the canopy with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent the past year learning acrobatics from a former ninja, landing beside him with a grin. "Did you really think I'd let you take a group of rookies into potentially dangerous territory without backup?" "The thought never crossed my mind," Kazuki lied with a straight face. "Liar, you've been planning to handle this solo since the mission request came in." Lucy turned to address the recruits directly. Rule 1 of working with Master Kazuki: he has a deeply troubling tendency to try protecting everyone else by taking unnecessary risks. Rule 2: never let him get away with it. "I don't take unnecessary risks," Kazuki protested. "You once tried to face down a dimensional cult leader by yourself because you were worried the rest of us might get hurt in the crossfire. That was different." "How?" "Because..." Kazuki paused, realizing he didn't actually have a good answer for that. "Because it seemed like a good idea at the time. And this is why we don't let him operate solo," Lucy explained to the recruits with exaggerated patience. "Brilliant tactical mind, terrible at risk assessment when people he cares about might be endangered." The new guild members looked back and forth between them with expressions of amusement and growing understanding. This was clearly a well-worn argument between people who cared deeply about each other. "Are you two?" Rika began hesitantly. "Dating," Hiro finished bluntly. "For about 6 months now," Lucy confirmed with a smile that made Kazuki's chest do something warm and fluttery. "Ever since he finally worked up the courage to ask me on that dinner date he'd been promising." "It was a very nice dinner," Kazuki said defensively. "That restaurant overlooking the harbor, just like you wanted." "It was perfect," Lucy agreed, her expression softening. "Even if you did spend the first half hour checking for potential security threats instead of looking at the menu. Old habits." As they continued through the forest, the recruits peppered him with questions about technique, strategy, and the various missions that had become legendary within the guild. Kazuki found himself enjoying the teaching role more than he'd expected. There was something satisfying about passing on knowledge to the next generation, helping them avoid the mistakes he'd made during his own learning process. "The most important thing to remember," he told them as they reached the cathedral area, "is that being a mage isn't about how powerful your magic is. It's about how you choose to use whatever power you have." "What if you don't have much power?" Rika asked quietly. "Some of us aren't ever going to be S-class level. Neither was I when I started," Kazuki said honestly. "I had unusual abilities, but I was nowhere near S-class strength. What made the difference was finding people who believed in me and learning to believe in them." He gestured toward Lucy, who was examining the cathedral ruins with the practiced eye of someone who'd become an expert in magical residue analysis. "Lucy taught me that intelligence and determination can overcome raw power differences, that careful planning and emotional bonds can achieve things that brute force never could." "And what did you teach her?" Hiro asked with the innocent curiosity of youth. "That sometimes the best strategy is to trust your teammates completely and then charge in together," Lucy answered before Kazuki could respond. "Also, that spiral-based magic is surprisingly versatile for creative problem-solving." She was right. Over the past year, Kazuki had developed dozens of new techniques using his reduced but more stable magical abilities. Simple spiral magic combined with tactical thinking had proven remarkably effective for everything from crowd control to precision demolition to creative transportation solutions. "No residual energy," Lucy reported as she finished her examination. "Whatever dimensional disturbances were detected here have completely dissipated." "Good," Kazuki said with relief. I wasn't looking forward to explaining to Master why we'd encountered another interdimensional crisis less than 2 years after the last one. Speaking of Master, Lucy said with a sly grin, he wanted me to remind you about the guild party tonight. Something about celebrating our newest S-Class mage's first year of not getting himself killed on dangerous missions. I haven't been getting myself killed. Injured, Lucy corrected. Not getting himself seriously injured on dangerous missions. That's better, I suppose. Marginally. The party was exactly what Kazuki had come to expect from fairy tale celebrations: loud, chaotic, emotionally overwhelming, and absolutely perfect. Half the guild was drunk, the other half was well on their way, and everyone had stories to share about the past year's adventures. Remember, when Kazuki tried to negotiate with those bandits instead of just punching them, Natsu was telling anyone who would listen. Turns out when you're really good at tactics, you can convince people to surrender without ever throwing a punch. Revolutionary concept, Gray said dryly. Using your brain to solve problems instead of just hitting things until they stop moving. Says the guy who solved our last infiltration mission by freezing an entire building solid, Kazuki pointed out. Hey, it worked. So did my negotiation strategy. Barely. Kazuki settled into a corner table with a mug of ale and watched his guildmates celebrate with the same enthusiasm they brought to everything else. Kana was arm-wrestling Elfman, while Levy and Gadgel provided opposing commentary. Wendy was showing some of the newer members a complex wind magic technique, while Carla offered critiques. Juvia was following Gray around with dedicated persistence while he pretended to be annoyed but clearly enjoyed the attention. Happy? Lucy asked, settling beside him with her own drink. Very, he replied honestly. I was just thinking about how different my life is from what I expected. Good different or bad different? Definitely good. In my previous life, I always felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Like if I wasn't strong enough, smart enough, fast enough, people would die and it would be my fault. Kazuki took a sip of his ale, gathering his thoughts. But here, with all of you, the weight is shared. The responsibility is collective. I can just be me. And who is that exactly? Lucy asked with genuine curiosity. Naruto Uzumaki, the legendary ninja, Kazuki, the mysterious wind mage. Or someone else entirely. I think, Kazuki said slowly, I'm just Kazuki. Someone who remembers being Naruto, who learned from that experience, but who chose to build a new life based on new bonds. He looked around the guild hall, taking in the familiar chaos with deep contentment. Someone who belongs here with this family in this moment. Good answer, Lucy said, leaning against his shoulder, because this family isn't letting you go anywhere. Even if I wanted to leave, which I don't, I'm pretty sure Natsu would drag me back by force. Damn right I would, Natsu called out from across the room, apparently having overheard them despite the noise. You're stuck with us forever now, Kazuki. Forever, Wendy agreed cheerfully. Forever, Gray confirmed with a grin. Forever, Urza said firmly from her position supervising the arm wrestling competition. One by one, every member of the guild added their voice to the chorus, until the entire hall was filled with people declaring their intention to keep him as family regardless of his opinions on the matter. Looking around at their faces flushed with alcohol and happiness, fierce with loyalty and affection, Kazuki felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for longer than he could remember. This was what he'd been searching for through 2 lifetimes without ever quite understanding what it was. Home, not a place but a feeling, not a destination but a connection. You know what? He said, raising his mug in a mock toast. I think I can live with forever. The resulting cheer probably woke half of Magnolia, but nobody seemed to care. This was fairy tale, where emotional declarations were always appropriate and volume control was a foreign concept. As the party continued around them, Lucy curled up against his side with the comfortable intimacy of people who'd learned to trust each other completely. So what now? She asked quietly. Now we keep doing what we've been doing, Kazuki replied. Take missions, protect people, drive each other crazy, and face whatever comes next together. Sounds perfect to me. Yeah, he said, watching Natsu challenge Gray to an eating contest while Happy provided unhelpful commentary. Me too. Later that night, after the party had wound down and the guild hall had finally fallen quiet, Kazuki stood on the roof looking out over Magnolia's sleeping streets. The city was peaceful, the kingdom was safe, and somewhere in the distance, he could sense the gentle presence of what had once been Yamata no Orochi, now integrated into the world's natural energy flows as a force of protection rather than destruction. His journey from vessel to sage to family member was complete. The spiral had brought him full circle, from loneliness to belonging, from isolation to connection. Sometimes, he reflected with a smile, the greatest jutsu wasn't a technique at all. Sometimes it was just knowing you were home. From lost memories to S-class mage, from fighting alone to finding family, Kazuki's story hit different, didn't it? That moment when he finally stopped trying to carry everyone's burdens by himself and just let them fight beside him instead. Chef's kiss, that's the good stuff right there. Drop a comment with your favorite scene. Mine's probably when Lucy refused to let him sacrifice himself again because they had a date planned. Like priorities, people. Hit subscribe if you want more What If madness, and peace out until next time.